back to the... Okay, in a moment we will get started with Article 8. I'd just like to remind everyone, it's been so long since we had a cozy meeting in this hall, that we reserved the final 2 rows of the center aisle for people who are not registered to vote. Are there any announcements that need to be made before we get started? I don't think so. Okay. So we're going to move on with Article 8. To see if the town will vote to transfer $14,000 from the Planning Board Sidewalk Mobile Oil Special Gift Account to complete the sidewalk project on Elliott Street and Fruit Street, and that any unexpended funds be returned to said special gift account, pass any vote, to take any action relative thereto, and the Finance Committee recommends that the town vote to transfer $14,000 from the Planning Board Sidewalk Mobile Oil Special Gift Account for purposes of this article. Discussion, Mr. Brooks.
Mr. Moderator, this is an amount that's been committed to the town by Mobile Oil under a special permit that was granted to them by the ZBA for the gas station at the corner of Elliott Street and Pond Street. The purpose of the money is to build sidewalks. We put the sidewalk in from the Sherburne Town line on Elliott Street almost to Prospect Street. There's a few areas that need to be finished, and this amount of money will allow us to do that.
Any further discussion? And on the Finance Committee's recommendation, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that passes. Okay, Article 9. See if the town will vote to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds and treasury or borrow under the provisions of General Laws Chapter 44 as amended, a sum of money for the following water system repairs and improvements. Clean wells number 4 and number 5 at the House Street facility, replace the water main in Pond Street, pass any vote, or take any action relative thereto. Finance Committee recommends that the town vote to transfer $100,000 from the Water Enterprise Fund surplus account for purposes of this article. Discussion? Mr. Blythe.
Mr. Moderator, my requested here is to do the 2 projects that are listed. While the contractor is finishing up the construction of the House Street well and treatment plant, the 2 pumps, or the pumps for each of these 2 wells have to be removed. We figured we might as well clean the wells and save some money at that time. And the second part of it is to replace the water main in Pond Street while the sewer construction is going on, rather than disrupt the street again, and the water main is in questionable condition anyway. We figured now would be the best time to do this as well.
Mr. Hanna.
Jim Hanna, 65 Elliott Street. I have more of an educational question on this than I do have an objection. The question I have is that, as I understand from a general intellectual point of view, that the water and sewer are under revolving account. And the guideline of the revolving accounts are that they sustain themselves through rates that they charge within their respective groupings, whether it be water or sewage. Now, my first question of an educational desire is, why does this even come before the body? Because obviously, if there's resident within the water account a surplus, the surplus can only be used for, I believe, 2 purposes. The first purpose is to either lower rates that are currently being charged, or to expend for capital improvements. So my first question to you is, why is it before us to vote on when indeed it's part of the revolving bylaw? Can you help me with that?
Well, Mr. Moderator, it's really not the true sense a revolving account, Jim. It's what's called an enterprise fund, and any expenditures have to be appropriated therefore approved by town meeting before they can be made.
Okay, thank you. Then in other words, it's not, I used the wrong term, revolving should be enterprise, but it is a self-serving account.
That's correct.
Okay, then I have to ask the second question. And this has to go back to an article that was brought, I think, before, it's Article 3, which, under the, I guess it's money that was necessary to close the budget out, or whatever the case may be, there was a request to transfer from the sewer enterprise fund $2,450 to the general fund. Now, this may be educational also. Does that mean that the enterprise fund not only can circulate upon itself for its own expenditures? Yes?
Mr. Moderator, excuse me, it was not transferred to the general fund?
No, the transfer from the surplus of the...
Not to the, you said transferred from the surplus to the general fund.
Yeah.
Not correct, Jim.
What's that?
It was appropriated to pay an unpaid bill from the sewer enterprise fund or the water enterprise fund, and they're all listed there.
Oh, okay, so it's associated with one of the
Correct.
expenses within this lining that
Exactly.
Identifies itself with it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Any further discussion? Then on the Finance Committee's recommendation, all those in favor of the Finance Committee's recommendation, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and that passes. Okay, Article 10. See if the town will vote to amend the provisions of Community Preservation Act, Chapter 267 of the Act of 2000, which was accepted by the town of Ashland by reducing the percentage of the surcharge on the real estate tax levied against the real property, and/or by amending the exemptions accepted by voters, pass any vote, or take any action relative thereto. And I have a motion by the Board of Selectmen that the town vote to amend the tax surcharge levied under the Community Preservation Act as accepted by the voters at the May 2002 annual election by reducing the percentage assessed from 3% to 0.5%. Discussion. Must be somebody. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi. This is Beth Rosenblum, 21 Corderville Road. I'm speaking on behalf of the Open Space Committee, which urges your consideration for maintaining the CPA surcharge at its present level. By sponsoring this article, the Board of Selectmen is asking for reconsideration too early in the process. Just last Wednesday at town meeting, your vote formed the Community Preservation Committee. The process has just begun. The committee hasn't yet had an opportunity to meet. Upon hearing the committee's recommendations, your vote at town meeting will determine the projects accepted and the level of spending. The CPA is a democratic and inclusive process because it allows the people of each town to decide how to spend their own money. The residents of Ashland make informed and reasonable decisions on how our money is being spent. CPA funds can be used to fund projects already on our radar screen at the discretion of the voters at town meeting. For instance, later this evening, the renovation of Town Hall will be voted on. Under CPA guidelines for historic preservation, this project is eligible for partial funding. Sorry. At our present 3% level, we get a 1-to-1 match, which means that whatever amount is voted to be put towards this project is only costing the voters 1/2. Because it is a 1-to-1 match, 1/2 is put in by the state. We are all well aware of the increasing tax burden in town. This example shows us how CPA can help lower the costs of town projects. How often does the state match our investment dollar for dollar while giving town voters freedom on spending decisions? At the 3% surcharge, we will raise over $680,000 in the first year. A lot can be done for Ashland with those funds. The CPA also allows us to pay attention to issues that relate directly to our community's quality of life. Have you ever driven through downtown Ashland and wondered how to protect our unique character, or worried that your aging parents might not be able to afford to remain in town due to the increased cost of living, or become concerned when you pass yet another wooded area being cleared for a subdivision? The CPA provides Ashland with the resources, tools, and funds to address these important issues. It is a unique opportunity to invest in the future of our town. The spring election brought CPA to Ashland for 5 years, so let's make the most of it. Let's make it work to Ashland's fullest advantage.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Scott Weiss, 228 Corderville Road, and a member of the Comprehensive Planning Committee, speaking on behalf of the committee here tonight. The Comprehensive Planning Committee has voted to support the CPA rate as approved by voters this past spring. We urge a vote opposing the proposed change. Passing this article as proposed will reduce the matching funds, not just in dollar amount, but in rate, so that there will be less than a one-to-one match per rate. And the CPA, as it is set up, represents an opportunity to increase our ability to fund those things that we are already pursuing, as indicated previously. I won't go into those things any further. Even if the matching funds are available for a short amount of time, it's a worthwhile investment to our town to increase the reach of our own funds and take available of what is essentially free money from the state. And again, just to close, supporting the proposed article will reduce our state match, reduce our ability to pursue and pay for these things that we would already be looking for overrides and other town funds to support in any case. Thanks.
Ms. Hoke and then Mr. Ellsworth.
I was actually absent from the Board of Selectmen's meeting and did not vote on this. I would oppose this article. I encourage you to not vote for this article. The town of Ashland is already pursuing issues around the three areas of affordable housing, open space, and historical preservation. The Board of Selectmen in the last few years have voted and encouraged the town at town meeting to acquire numerous pieces of land for open space. We have not received any state reimbursement for that. It is my feeling that the Board of Selectmen, even after I leave in a week, will continue to probably do that over the next few years. And I think it's time that the town of Ashland finally actually gets a piece of our share for state reimbursement. Other towns are getting it. We need to take advantage of this plan, and I encourage you to oppose this article. Thank you very much.
Ellsworth.
I rise to oppose my esteemed colleague. This is a tax. This is probably, I think, the fifth tax now that we've levied on ourselves over and above 2.5 in the last 5 years. We did the library, we did the recreational fields behind the senior center coming up. We're about to do the schools, we did the senior center itself, and now we've got this. These are all Prop 2.5 override or exclusions that we're doing to ourselves to the tune of something on the order, my estimates are 20% by the time we get through doing it. 20% is an incredible increase in the rise of our taxes. There is no free money, Scott. You don't get this money unless you spend the money. In order to get the 3% return from the state, you have to spend 3%. Yes, it would be nice to have that money. I'm not sure that we can afford it. The special interest groups that come into this town hall and into this meeting that cause things like the senior center and the recreational fields and so forth basically can make these things happen with CPA. They're probably good for the town. My concern is with the school coming up and the huge loads that we have about to hit us on a tax basis, does this make sense for the town? That's my personal feeling, but it also happens to be the majority feeling of the Board of Selectmen in the way we voted. This tax act, this Prop 2.5 Override Tax Act, which is what it is specifically enabled by legislation to be reconsidered every year and to have the percentage taken into consideration. And that's exactly what we're doing. It can be moved by the Board of Selectmen. It can be moved by people from town meeting floor. It is a two-step process. What we do tonight does not cause it to go away or to remain forever. It merely, if it is voted to go back to the polls in May, the people will state whether or not they wanted to leave it at 3% or whether or not they wanted to go down to 0.5%, or whatever we pick in between. And that can happen at every point along the road until the 5 years are up. So this act was specifically written to permit town meeting to adjust the amount that we taxed ourselves on a dynamic basis. We are now going to be taxed for the current year, the current tax year, at 3%. What we're talking about here is setting the stage for next year to adjust the tax rate to some other number. The Board of Selectmen has suggested 0.5% to get the number back down to a reasonable level. Other folks may disagree with that. But finally, I will close with this statement. It is my personal belief that we are taxing ourselves to death in this town, that we have no alternative with respect to the schools. We have 900 seats coming, and we have to do that. But I believe that everything else needs to be put aside and needs to be delayed. I think this personally is one of the things that has to be delayed. And you'll find me standing up here saying the same thing about the town hall. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Bill Peach, 70 Oak Street. I actually was wondering what the difference is in the revenue basis between the two figures, between the 3% and the 0.5% proposed by the Board of Selectmen in this issue. Does anyone have that figure? Oh, I guess the next person speaking does, so I'll just defer my question.
Okay. Mr. Montenegro.
Ben Montenegro, 104 Woodland Road. I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee. The Affordable Housing Committee supports this 3% unanimously. John and I always disagree anyhow. I can see where in the next 2 years, if you remain at the 3%, you're going to take in around $1 million, give or take a little. If the town hall passes, that money can be used to defray some of the cost of the town hall, as well as it could be used to buy land, and it could be used for the affordable housing. Anytime anybody wants to give me a buck for a buck, I take it. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Why don't you go next? Yes, ma'am.
Judith Sallet, 29 Meeting House Path, and I'm speaking for myself, although I am a member of the CPC, the Comprehensive Plan Committee, and the Open Space Committee. John, with all due respect, that's true. We have taxed ourselves up the gazoo, and we haven't gotten $1 to match it up to now. This one gives us money. No, you don't ever get anything. You don't get a free ride for anything. Although I come close with my frequent flyer miles. I have to buy something. It's what I'm going to buy anyway. And I purchase that, and I build up my little miles, and I have to pay $50 to the company, the credit card company, and that's fine. So the first $50 of my ticket I pay for. But it allows me to open up so many things for myself because I am buying as I go. I'm paying, but then I get it back in real time and real things. And that is exactly the process that happens here. We're building a reserve. We can use it. We can go beyond the year. We can keep building it up and getting, granted, interest isn't great now, but we're all looking for it to go up, and it's better on a larger sum than it is on a smaller sum. To emasculate it now is, in my opinion, crazy, because we don't build up the money we could. We are reviewing something that hasn't started yet. We don't know how well it's working, what it actually can do for us at 3%. Let's find out. Come back next year, we'll discuss it again. But give it a shot. I was in a meeting where there were selectmen from neighboring towns, and they thought it was fabulous that we got 3%. And I said, but there may be a question about this. And they couldn't believe that we were actually going to do this. I think it is probably the best thing we can do with our money. And if you're frugal, you want to get the most you can for every buck. And this is the way to do it. Thank you.
Yes.
John Cohen, Adanetta Road. Been involved with debate over the CPA for a while, and there are several lines of thought here. Some of the people have said that we could actually save money because we get the state reimbursement, but the only way that we can save money is if we use the CPA very carefully to only use that money for things that we would do otherwise. For example, the town hall, or the natural obligations that the town has to provide for people in need. So there are things that the town of Ashland does right now, and we should take credit from the state and get our share of the tax that's put on us as citizens through the Registry of Deeds. So, it's a risk in terms of are we going to save money or not. We can only save money if we as a town exercise discipline and use the CPA carefully to follow the rules that have been set out to take advantage of these matching funds. So at this point in time, I guess I'm in favor of taking the chance for a little while to see, can the town do the smart thing and get the credit from the state for the things that we're already doing along the lines of open space and historical preservation and so on. And the only other thing I wanted to say in terms of all these wonderful numbers that are being tossed around that the town will get this, well, actually we have this money already. It's just in our pocket, and the vote is to take it out of our pocket and to put it in the state coffer. So it's just a question of how you want to have your own money spent. It's not any kind of free money. It's a gimmick that the state legislature, they raised your taxes without asking you, and then they're putting this carrot in front of you to sort of do the other half of the dirty work for them. So I'm not impressed at all with this free money that we're getting, but that's the legislature. We voted for them, so we've got to just do the best we can under the circumstances.
Mr. Hoffman?
Curtis Hoffman, 58 Hilldale Road. It might be helpful for members of town meeting to understand where the state match comes from. It comes out of fees collected by the Registry of Motor Vehicles. Currently,
Registry of Deeds, I believe.
Registry of Deeds, okay. Currently, 51 towns in cities in Massachusetts have passed CPA. The amount that will come out of the state is a fixed amount to be distributed amongst the towns that do pass this. We're in the advantageous position of being within that first 1/7 of the towns to have passed it, and therefore it is more likely that we will get the one-for-one match in the first several years of operation of CPA than later on down the line when perhaps other towns have seen that this is a good thing and pass it on. So I would say that we should take advantage in the first couple of years of the 3% when we can get it, and then maybe see how it goes down the line and possibly lower the percentage at some future point, but not now.
Mr. Long?
Shelley Balone, 10 Ivy Lane. I have 2 points. One is I do have the facts and figures that I'd like to share with you, and I'm prepared to do that up front. But I would also like to make a motion to allow Christopher Sicardi, who's with the Community Preservation Coalition, sitting in the back of the room, to join me in the front. He's been working with most of the towns across the state who have passed the CPA and has seen what it has done for towns, and he'd be in a position to help answer questions as well as make some statements.
Okay, do we have a second? I hear a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no, and that passes. So, sir?
Hi. First, I wanted to thank Mr. Moderator and the Board of Selectmen and town officials and all of you for allowing me to be here. My name is Chris Sicardi, and I work for the Community Preservation Coalition, and we work with communities around the state to help them understand and implement the Community Preservation Act. And as Sherry said, I've worked with almost all of the 51 communities that have passed the CPA to date, helping them with implementation issues and just trying to help communities understand how the Community Preservation Act works and what are some of the potential benefits. I was asked to come here to answer questions that any of you may have, and I'd be happy to do that as the discussion proceeds. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, for being here. Just a few background points. I've lived in Ashland for 21 years. I've been on the Conservation Commission for the last 5. And last October, I was laid off with 4,000 other people from EMC. And what that allowed me to do over the last year is take some time to learn some things about the community and the state. I took a 6-week seminar, Citizens Legislative Seminar in Boston, to learn how legislation such as this is passed. And I also took a 9-week course at the University of Massachusetts on the Community Preservation Institute. And that allowed me to get really close to all the facts about this act. And what I wanted to do tonight, I asked for permission to be able to speak with you, is I've heard so much misinformation between public hearings in town and conversations among people and even articles in the newspaper that weren't exactly accurate. And I wanted to give you all the opportunity, like I had, to get the facts so you can make an informed decision. So that's my goal here today. You've heard that the CPA was passed in September of 2000. The point was to allow towns like Ashland to be able to preserve what they value. It was highly structured. It is a surcharge. It is a tax. These things are true. However, based on the way it's set up right now, we have the unbelievable luxury of getting dollar-for-dollar match. So what I'm showing here are the facts and the numbers for you. As was mentioned before, 51 of the 351 communities in Massachusetts have adopted the act. What we voted for in Ashland was this 3% surcharge. What that means is what your home is assessed at has a $100,000 exemption that comes off the top, and then there's 3% of basically the property taxes you would be paying with that exemption. So if you have a $250,000 assessment, what we're talking about here, and these are based on figures from the assessor's office that we obtained 10 days ago, it would be $18.89 a quarter. This is at 3%. If your house was assessed at $325,000, we're talking $28.33 per quarter, basically a dinner out. With that 100% state match, which, by the way, the reason we're guaranteed that right now is because only 51 towns have signed up for this. There's more money going into the pot, and the way that pot is funded are fees from the Registry of Deeds and Land Court. So whether or not we partake of this pot, it's being funded by these fees. Last week, the state mailed out checks to towns that had the CPA in place, totaling $17.8 million. The fund was $39 million, so we've got $21 million left over that's going to roll to next year. While that fund continues to build, and towns are collecting fees, and that match doesn't surpass what's in the fund, every town's going to get 100%. There's a complicated calculation that it only goes to 80%, and then it's second round, and if you're not 3%, you don't get any of the second round. At this point, that doesn't matter because we're not there yet. The biggest point, are the red figures at the bottom. At 0.5%, with the 100% matching fund, what we get the first year is $114,597. If we leave it at 3%, as it is today, with the match, it's $687,581, based on the numbers from the assessor's office that we got 10 days ago. That's 6 times the money. Second page, please. How are we going to use the money? A couple of things. First of all, we agreed on a committee last week when we voted. The selectmen are going to be appointing people to be on that committee. I'm hoping I'm one of them as a member of the Conservation Commission. We will look at what the town needs and make recommendations. Not $1 can be spent without you all at town meeting voting to spend that money. So nobody's going to take your money and spend it on things you don't want. What I want as a taxpayer, one that's been unemployed for a year, by the way, is to be sure that those funds are used in the way that's most valuable to us. And that would be things that we've been talking about, like town hall. And in fact, FinCom in the recommendation, when we looked in the warrant, said, if possible, use CPA funds. So there are a lot of things we're trying to do in town. There's no question about that. Taxes are going up. There's no question about that. But where else can you double your money right now? When we talk about this match, it means that a project we decide to do costs us half as much. That's what we keep hearing. The CPA, while it is a surcharge, actually reduces the cost of that project to all of us. And not only that, in addition to the matching fund, if we keep it at 3%, we're eligible for grants from the state for open space acquisition. And a grant is free. We don't have to pay that back. So not only are we getting 100%, we're getting access to grants that we would not before. So I agree with you. If the state match goes down and this doesn't make as much financial sense, we can lower it. Every year we can change this. In 4 years, we can decide to do away with it. It may make sense then. But today, in these tight financial times, when there isn't any other way you can double your money, we know we've got projects on the plate we want to do. In my opinion, it is not the time to reduce that percentage. Thank you.
I would just kind of like to respond to the speakers and the presentation, and also to my wonderful colleague sitting to my left, Mr. Ellsworth. John is right. Town meeting can be packed with special interest groups. We've seen that in May or April, last April. We saw it again last week. But the voters did pass this in May, and I will support this the same way I did the school vote in May. I am not a big one on new taxes. Many people know that I have not supported new taxes. I don't agree with them. But unfortunately, I think this is the town's opportunity. We're already spending the money. In the last 3 years, the Board of Selectmen have agreed to encourage, at town meeting, for you to support the purchase of open space land to the left tune of $2.4 million. Ball fields of $850,000, and town hall renovations tonight of $4 million, for a total of $7.3 million. If the town of Ashland had CPA, when we put these projects forward, and believe me, there are other projects that will come forward like this in the town of Ashland, instead of 7.3, it would have cost us approximately 3.2. This is your opportunity to actually reduce your taxes, because you're going to be taxed for these purchases of future open space, other renovations, historical preservation, and affordable housing. So take the opportunity, reduce your future taxes, and oppose this article. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kerwin, then Ms. Finn.
Well, unlike the last few speakers, I'm actually going to support the substitute motion. I'm going to tell you why. There's not one person in this whole room that can stand up and tell me exactly how this money is going to be spent. Not one of you. And that's the perfect example of taxation without representation, which I don't think is in our Constitution, right? Now, the other thing, I want to talk about some of the numbers that were presented. So, a home with a valuation of $250,000, it was $18.89 per quarter, which is about $95, $96 per year. That's now, okay? After we do some other capital projects in future years, as taxes may increase, may not, but they probably will, because they usually do every year. That number goes up and up and up. This is nothing more than piling on. And that's why I would support this motion. Our taxes are too high. We're going to have people in this town paying in the order of $10,000 or $11,000 a year in property taxes the next few years. And look what we can fund. We're in trouble funding our schools, funding our police and fire, because nothing more than piling on.
Mr. Ellsworth?
I know you're all thinking, so what in the hell is wrong with John Ellsworth? All that free money, he's throwing it away. The problem is This has all been presented as if it's going to go on forever. And you talk about, well, it may decrease, and it may decrease, and it may decrease, and we can do away with it. But that's not the way the funding projects are managed. When you take on a major capital project, you commit yourself for a term. And if you commit yourself to a 20-year term, then the money halves in the third year of paying out that project, which is not atypical, I think, in this case. It's to be expected. Just about everybody expects all of this magical CPA money to start to degrade. Then that means that we've committed ourselves at an expected spend level that's twice what we're taxing ourselves for. So if we go out and we buy $1 million worth of debt, annual debt, on a projected revenue of, say, $650, we fund $450 off the tax rate, $650 out of CPA, and then CPA goes down to $350, all of a sudden, we don't have enough money to fund our debt. That's my problem. The projects that we are talking about are not small projects. Yes, it would be really nice if we could pay for the whole of Town Hall out of CPA, but that's not the way we fund things. It would be funded out over 10 or 12 or 15 years. It would be really nice if we could go out and buy a big chunk of land and fund it out of CPA, but typically it's over 20 years. So all of a sudden we wind up with a patchwork quilt of commitments, and CPA degraded to the point where now it's all coming off the tax rate. That's the problem with CPA.
Sam.
Cassie Sammons, 8 Byron Road. I just want to reiterate what John has said. The FinCom does not have a recommendation on this because the selectmen have not put a percentage in it by the time we had to vote on it. So that's why we didn't make a recommendation on it, not because we're split or divided over for or against. I will reiterate to you what John has said, and in a simple scenario. You vote this money for Town Hall, or the percentage of it that you can, for $4 million, and it's going to be paid off over 5 years. The state has only guaranteed that we will receive CPA reimbursement for this year and next year. Beyond that, they have not committed. So if we go ahead and as a town meeting vote to put the money to Town Hall, and we have a 5-year payout, and at the end of year 2, the state does no longer fund CPA, the town of Ashland is paying the whole bill for the next 3 years. And nobody has been able to explain to Dexter at the state level, and he has asked, whether that money can be raised inside Prop 2.5 or outside Prop 2.5. If we're talking it has to be raised inside Prop 2.5, you could be looking at a $600,000 hit a year to the town budget. So you can vote it for this year and get the reimbursement and see what happens next year and revote it, but I can guarantee you that I will have an article back here next year if the state does not continue the funding. The problem is, if before we receive notice that the state's not going to continue the funding, we vote a project, we are stuck with the whole cost of that project. And as has been mentioned tonight, with the school, the library, the senior centers, the fields, if you don't mind that extra hit hitting your tax bill, if that happens, go ahead and vote for this. If you do mind it, I would vote no. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ken Rush, Belknap Circle. I have a couple of questions just to clarify in my mind, and perhaps in some of the other voters here in the hall. If we vote on this tonight, and let's say it passes, and we vote to reduce the rate, when would that be effective? Is the action tonight actually going to reduce the rate, or is this just putting it on the ballot in May? In which case, does that mean it's really only effective in FY04, and our FY03 taxes would get this full 3% surcharge?
Mr. Boyce. Mr. Moderator, your tax bill that you receive in December, the 2 quarters, 3 and 4, will have the CPA on it at 3%. If it passes tonight, it's got to go to the ballot in May, which will not affect it until FY04, tax bills that come out in December of '03. Thank you.
Judith Salad again, still. And again, it's making it sound like John and I are having a dialogue, and I don't mean for that to happen. And also, it wasn't just you, John. It was when you say, in fact, you didn't say it, I'm sorry, that it is taxation without representation. That's true, in the sense that it is direct democracy. I don't know why, and I'm really disappointed that so many of you are saying, as soon as we have a committee, which we now do, they are going to do awful things. They're going to put stuff past this town, and we're not going to know what hit us, and we're going to be paying. The town has, anyone in the community can, it's like a grant. You can go to the committee and suggest something. There are things that are going to come up that are going to be clearly something that the committee will consider. They bring it to town meeting. Town meeting can say no. Town meeting can say we don't want to use any CPA money to borrow against. We only want the projects that we can pay for or partially pay for with the CPA money. You cannot borrow out beyond 2 years, 3 years. And that's our mandate to you, the committee. And they cannot do it to us. Then we can only do that to ourselves, and the people in this town are smart enough to understand that. And they've certainly had it explained to them, a number of times. The townspeople have the complete say over how this money is used. It is the only time that we have been in this position. Thank you.
Hypothetical question. In the event that tonight's town meeting were to vote for the 0.5% as it's been presented, it then has to go on the ballot in May. If in May it's defeated, does that mean we stay at 3%? That answers that question. That's for the rest of you to absorb.
What's up?
Bill Peach, 70 Oak Street. First, I'd like to thank the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen because I know that you do have our best interest at heart and our best interest as a town. No, I really do. I think that the way you're looking at this is if we have this money, we may expect that we're going to get it for longer than we do, and that may cause us to get in debt further, make long-term projects that we wouldn't do otherwise, and maybe we can't afford right now. And I understand and I appreciate that perspective. But my way of looking at it is if we vote this now for the first couple of years, it sounds like we're going to do $600,000 in matching grants back from the state this year, and according to what I've been just told, it's guaranteed for at least one more year. So to me, that's $1.2 million in state funds that we wouldn't get any other way. Am I correct or not? So it's $600,000 for 2 years? It's $300,000 a year because, okay, so it's $600,000 over 2 years. Okay. Okay, so that tells me that at least for the next 2 years, though, if they take that money, the state is going to match it. So that would be an extra $600,000 from the state that would flow into our funds that we could use to pay for projects that we approve as voters at town meeting, and that also, whatever ones of them have to go and get voted on in the ballots, that happens as well. So what we're really talking about here is a guaranteed short term, and the future is very nebulous, but almost likely to go down. So we should separate, but one of your concerns seems to be that as soon as we know that money is coming, we'll misestimate the impact that will have for the town, and then we'll vote a big project like the town hall, hoping to be reimbursed for it, and commit to that without getting the money back, which will affect us adversely, especially if we can't do a Proposition 2.5 override, and you don't know whether that's going to be legal or not yet. So there's a key piece that we don't know yet from the state, which is whether or not we can do this outside of Proposition 2.5 and do an override. If not, it's going to have to come out of the town budget in other areas to meet these commitments. So really what you're saying is the prudent course is even if we accept this and pass this one, we should not take on a major project like the town hall renovation unless we're willing to guarantee and commit that we can take that kind of a hit from our local funds. Am I understanding you correctly? Is that what you were trying to tell us? You know, this stuff isn't necessarily good or bad in and of itself, but if it encourages us to take those big commitments like the town hall renovation, that may be a real hardship for us in 2 years. Is that what you were trying to tell us?
Mr. Moderator, without taking a position one way or the other, and I'm administration, I'm not a voter,
Okay.
so I think the concern is that, like, I assume like everybody does, you don't spend the money if you don't have it. So, as Ms. Sallet mentioned, you only appropriate at town meeting the amount that you have. That's one way to look at it. The other way that is allowed under the CPA is to use the CPA funds to pay debt that's been approved for a particular project. For instance, Town Hall is $4 million, round numbers, and say it passes tonight. So that's and it passes with the recommendation from the CPA, or the Community Preservation Committee. Town meeting uses those monies to pay the entire debt. What happens, and I don't have an answer for this, but what happens when, well, not when, but if CPA monies are less than anticipated, the amount anticipated needed to pay the debt for 20 years that we would borrow typically to remodel Town Hall? That's number one. And the part of it that I can't answer, and Kathy mentioned, was that should the state's portion drop off, reduced by any number, and we were banking on 100% of it, can that difference be excluded from Proposition 2.5 without a subsequent vote? I haven't been able to get an answer from DOR on that. And if it were not excluded from Proposition 2.5, then it would actually be inside the debt limit, which would affect the entire operational budget of the town, and it could cause some havoc for sure. So there's two different positions that you might take. The second is if you do spend it and commit it to an issue, what happens if the state's share is reduced or goes away?
And
I don't have the answer.
And it's a long-term project.
And it's a long-term project, correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Lorraine Chachari, 2 High Street. As far as the open space purchases go, in the last few years, we've entered the dangerous practice of purchasing land through eminent domain, supported by the Selectmen and the FinCom, with very little regard for the consequences of litigation. At least one of those projects is expected to cost us several $1 million above and beyond the price approved at town meeting. I find the CPA a refreshing alternative.
Yes, ma'am.
Amanda Galtman, Mountain Gate Road. I've heard a lot of concerns tonight about people who are afraid about potential borrowing on CPA funds. And I wanted to make the point that lowering the surcharge, as this article asks, does not inhibit borrowing. If I may make an analogy, if you have a teenage son who has his very first credit card, and you're concerned, rightly so, that he might get mired into credit card debt because he doesn't know how to use it properly, then cutting his weekly allowance will not inhibit him from getting into debt. It just won't. The way you can prevent your son from getting into credit card debt is to guide him and impart your values to him about how to spend money properly and how to borrow properly. Then that might prevent the bad outcomes that you fear. Similarly, as we in Ashland implement CPA, the best way, I think, to prevent us from getting into a negative financial situation is for all of us to work with the Community Preservation Committee that was voted in last week, impart our values to it, and if those values
say that we shouldn't get into long-term debt, then we tell the committee that. We go to their public forums and tell them what we want them to do with our money. We tell them how we want them to view borrowing. Perhaps we don't want them to borrow at all. We tell them that. We go to future town meetings at which they will recommend projects. And if we don't like the projects, we vote them down. I think changing the surcharge just to think that that's going to inhibit borrowing is just mixing up the concept of the budget and the credit limit. I think it's much better to take a positive stance of accepting that CPA is here in Ashland and accept the challenge of working with the CP committee to make sure that it does as much as it can for Ashland. Another point I wanted to make was about what towns can do that will stay within the budget. The town of Bedford has the distinction of being the first town to adopt CPA. They have a very nice website where they include what their recommendations are for next May. And they also include a long-term plan, which goes out for a whopping 10 years, in which they stay within their budget for each individual year among those 10. What are they proposing for this May? For example, purchase a 16-acre or a 22-acre parcel of land, $300,000. That's within the budget. Preserve historic portion of a certain building, $900,000. That's within their budget. Preservation of an old house in town, $10,000. That's within their budget. Set aside money for affordable housing projects to happen at a later date, $155,000. That's within their budget. Build a skate park, which, by the way, we did in the spring and didn't get reimbursement from the state for. $85,000. That's within their budget. I think if we jump to the conclusion that we will only be doing things with CPA money that involve long-term borrowing, that are overstepping our budget, then we're making a dangerous assumption. And there is a cost to that dangerous assumption, namely all the matching funds that we stand to lose if we just resign ourselves to our nervousness about how the CP committee will work. I say let's get past that nervousness. Let's work with the CP committee and future town meetings to make sure that this benefits all of us in town.
Mr. Montenegro. I would like somebody to clarify something for me here. If we, at the end of this year, we'll have over $600,000 in that account? Okay, if we decide and the town hall is passed, we can only get 80% of that if they choose to put it into the town hall. What I want to know is, because you're saying you stretch it out, do we get that as a lump sum up front? Or do we have to stretch it over the life of the bond?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. To answer that question, every October 15th, the state distributes the funds, and those funds are based on what you as a community collected in the previous fiscal year. So you get the full, as a lump sum, that amount of state matching funds. The locally collected funds you get as people pay their tax bills. If it's quarterly, then it would be every 3 months. So you get those two pieces at different times during the year.
But you get it in 1 year?
Each year. Every October 15th, you get that full amount that you're entitled to.
Okay, and so I don't know what they mean by they'll lose if they take the money and they put that towards a bond for the town hall or any other project that's upfront money.
Yes, ma'am.
Jones and Friday, One Shore Road, and go speak to what Ben's asking, and I still, I guess, need a little clarification. I'm trying to understand why, if we have, say, I assume $300,000 and then match to $600,000 as an example from the state, the total of $600,000. Why can't we put that to something to pay off a debt that's already been incurred? Say we vote the town hall and we just put $600,000 off the top of that. Can't we pay debt ahead? I mean, I can pay my mortgage ahead. Is that not?
It's not permitted.
It's not permitted
It has
to
to
pay
be
it?
on new projects.
It has to be on new projects, okay. Something that hasn't been funded yet? Okay. Okay, so that's why, all right, so that's why they put CPA in the town hall, so it could be used for town hall if we, for this year?
Ms. Salmon?
No, the FinCom specifically worded the article, our recommendation for the article for town hall, so that CPA funds could be used if the town votes for that at a later date. But that's the only one in here that could be used for. Any past expenditures or past things that are voted, including tonight, besides that, would not be eligible for that funding.
But, say the state didn't match 100%, say they matched 50% or whatever, then could we take the $450,000 and put it to the...
It all depends what kind of project the town votes. If the town votes a small project that's within the limit of what we're getting for that year, and we know the money's coming that year, that's okay. If the committee gets all excited about another project, say some open space land that's going to cost several $1 million, and decides to go for it and put it forth, then you're taking the risk that the matching money may not be there in subsequent years, because typically you buy land over 30 years. 20 years. Excuse me, I was corrected by the town manager.
Can we make the mandate to the CPA group to be that they only fund projects that
You
are...
cannot make a mandate. You can go to their forums, you can tell them what you want, but it is the CPA committee's decision themselves to bring forward a motion to town meeting of how that money is spent, and then the town votes yes or no.
Okay.
No, you cannot amend it. They have to bring the recommendation forward, so it has to be supported by them. That's the rules. That's the law.
Can you amend the sum at that time?
No, you cannot. They're the only ones that can recommend how that money is spent.
So no substitute motions, et cetera?
No,
et cetera?
no substitute motions on town meeting floor.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay?
Mr. DeSoni?
Yes, Mark Sony, 49 Hawthorne Road. I'm one for not really knowing how for sure we're doing all this, because people say we can get this back in a couple of years, this number, that number. But isn't affordable housing and open space, the 2 of the 3 is going forward, the opposite of what it's going to be CPA? One is open field, which means no building. Then you want affordable housing. What's the difference? The other one, 0.5% or 3. It's still going to be a tax. Yes, we're going to get hit. It's going historical, town hall. Give it to the whole 3% the town hall, have that billed, or go spread it out to everything else in the town. 1 sewer, 2 schools, then town hall, or affordable houses, everything, not just a certain list. And I would like to move for a vote for this question.
We're almost there. Yes, ma'am.
Amanda Galtman, Mountain Gate Road. I just wanted to address one point that was mentioned about can town meeting change a recommendation made by the Community Preservation Committee. They cannot change the nature of the recommendation, but they can reduce the amount of appropriation. That's the only change they're permitted to make, but they can say, I don't want you to spend $500,000 of CPA money on town hall. I only want you to spend $400,000 of CPA money on town hall, or something of that nature. They can change the amount.
Mr. Hanna.
I've heard a great deal of this, and it's rather interesting. It wasn't less than a week ago that this town meeting voted on a $42 million project with no guarantee of money for the first 7 to 8 years. And they whistled that through like it was coming in the mailbox tomorrow morning. Now, when you look at that in association with this particular request, this is a matter of accumulating matching funds. And you're getting it. It's in your pocket, it's in your checkbook, it's in whatever you want to place it. And the decision here and by this body is to determine how to use it. And our management body is having a heart attack over the fact that we may indeed use it for some frivolous expenditure that may put us in debt down the road. Oh my God, last Wednesday night, we pumped $10 million into our budget, our future planning, without any reimbursement. And we thought that was quite okay. And there's no guarantee for that either. So just put this stuff in perspective. This is a good deal. You're getting a buck back for a buck. Okay, so maybe that you can't lay it on a $10 million project, but certainly you could lay it on something that's maybe the $90,000 we set aside for the correction of the doghouse up behind the DPW. Now, the poor dogs have been laying there in pain for 3 years because we appropriated the money and never did anything. Now, God, so there you go. There's $90,000 you can use for it immediately. So please, just put it in perspective and go about your business. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, David. We'll give you a shot. You've been a good boy 2 nights. Go ahead.
Mr. Moderator, through you, my name's David Foster. I've been one of the instigators of this CPA well over 2.5 years ago. Since I first went to the Board of Selectmen to find out that they wanted to cut the rate, and I had to go to them because I heard scuttlebutt about it, I went to them and listened to what they said, and they said they were going to do this. And I was angry. There's no doubt about it. A lot of people worked very hard at trying to bring this to the town of Ashland because they thought it was the right thing to do. 51 other communities have agreed that this is the right thing for this town to do. And lo and behold, the leadership of the town doesn't like disseminating power to others. And you've heard some people say, this is a powerful group. I heard it the other night at town meeting, Wednesday night. What they do is they don't trust anybody else but themselves. It's you who are going to decide how to spend that money. I don't want to talk about the dollars and cents and the percentages. You all heard that now. I want to talk about what CPA stands for. Community preservation. I have been standing before this community for a long time. I've heard arguments for development. How can we control it? I've heard arguments about, gosh, in town hall, how do we save it? I've heard arguments about open space. Yes, we buy open space, but we put a school on it. It's not open space, it's going to be school. All right? The deer and the animals love that. They can play soccer. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that is for the town. It's called community preservation. It's here for a purpose. It's here to preserve your community. It's here for all of you to take back your community. It's not government. It's not school. It is other items that are never going to see the light of day. This town has been broke. It's been broke for a very long time. Do you think the Open Space Committee feels right to walk up and say, let's spend $1 million in open space when we're talking about people in town hall who may lose their jobs? No. Do you think affordable housing ever going to come to the forefront when people are losing their jobs, or we have to scale back to zero budget? How many years it's been zero budget? How long? We put money in infrastructure. We spent millions of dollars on sewer lines in phases. We just put $10 million into our water treatment plant. When do we stop to look at what this community is made of? When do we take the bull by the horns and say, let's put a few dollars into doing some of these things? It is disappointing that the leadership tries to cut this down before it even starts. Because you know why? Once it gets started, you all will be liking what you got. And then God forbid if it goes beyond 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, the committee has to give you a report of how much money we have in the kitty. You will know what the bottom line is. It is up to you to spend it up to that bottom line or leave it. You don't have to spend it. Open space gets their 10% automatically. You can take that 10% and set it aside for 2 years, 3 years, until the kitty builds up, if you have a project in mind. You can do the same thing with affordable housing or historic preservation. Ladies and gentlemen, give this a chance. They say they're going to come back every year. I am not going to stand up here every year to argue this case. The voters have decided. I heard from the many people. They didn't know what they were voting on. Isn't that the quote why we're discussing this? Is because you didn't know what you were voting on? That's not right. You knew what you were voting on, and you decided to take the road that you took. Now, please, tell them no, let's give it a chance, let's bring in the revenue, let's get some things accomplished with this thing, and let's applaud the committee who's doing it, applaud yourselves for taking a stand and making it happen. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Cohen?
John Cohen, 8 Annetta Road. I did make a remark last week about, controlling this committee. The issue is that there's only a small fraction of the town here, and there's a lot of people here who are working their second job or they're doing their homework with their kids, and they just, they have to make some choices in their life of where they spend their time. And with Proposition 2.5, one of the downsides of that is that they feel that they're safe, that they can trust the town to spend their money within that pre-established limit. And with the CPA, we're taking a risk by putting that money in the hands of the town meeting. Now that means that all those people who were comfortable with the established procedure, or all the committees making their reports, the finance committee making their recommendations, and then the Prop 2.5 just making only things above a level of inflation have to come to the ballot. Now they have to go to every single town meeting to make sure that the advocates for special interests don't spend their money. So that's the risk. I'm willing to go for approving the 3% level for a couple of years to see how it works out.
Something new, Ms. Salas?
No,
Because
that
otherwise
was...
we have to move on.
Well,
Is it new?
It was an answer to... Okay.
Is it
Same
new?
thing, essentially.
Then
Okay.
then we'll go for the question, unless you got something new.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
Okay. All right, on the question, the motion that we're going to vote on is the Selectmen's motion that the town vote to amend the tax surcharge levied under the Community Preservation Act as accepted by the voters at the May 2002 annual election by reducing the percentage assessed from 3% to 0.5%. So a yes vote on the Selectmen's motion will be to reduce it to the 0.5%, and a no vote will be to keep it the same. So all those in favor of the Selectmen's motion, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. Let's say the noes have it. Ready to move on? Okay. Article 11.
Excuse me.
See if the town will vote to transfer from the
Excuse me,
affordable...
Mr. Moderator, I don't know if this is appropriate procedure, and
It may
I
be.
apologize for not knowing better, but I would like to move for immediate reconsideration of that vote so that it can't be taken up again later in the evening.
Okay.
Second.
Could you just identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry, Roberta Suleman from 28 Woodridge Lane.
And I heard a second. Okay, so...
Urging a vote of no.
I'm urging a vote of no, yes.
Okay, so there's a motion for reconsideration, urging a vote of no. All those in favor of reconsideration, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. And the noes have it. And reconsideration failed. Okay, Article 11. See if the town will vote to transfer from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund the sum of $90,000 or such other sum as town meeting deems appropriate to be used to facilitate the planning and development of affordable rental housing on town-owned land for elderly and moderate-income persons, pass any vote, or take any action relative thereto. I was handed a memorandum from the planning board voting to recommend approval of Article 11. I would take to be a motion to accept Article 11. Discussion. Mr. Montenegro.
Do I have to say my name again?
Yes, sure you do.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Black Mountain.
Thank you.
Maybe I can explain a little bit about the $90,000. The $90,000 is part of a trust fund. This does not cost the town any tax money. This money came from the Sudbury Park development and was put into escrow or a trust fund so that we could use it for future uses, such as buying land or using it for engineering or whatever. We have approximately $125,000 in that trust fund. What we're asking you for is to give us $90,000 so that we can go ahead and do the engineering necessary if we get the land from the town. If anybody has any questions, we'll try to answer.
Further discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Susan Lipsitz on Heritage Ave, and I have a question as to whether this is an article that stands on its own, or is it directly related to Article 12? And if it is directly related to Article 12, then I have a point to make with respect to that article.
It probably should be reversed there.
Well, I guess the answer is it's directly related to Article 12.
John Cohen, Finance Committee. The proposal that you'll be making, is it true that all of the money will come from some other funding source, and it's simply the land plus the $90,000 that will be coming from the town, and as you say, the $90,000 will be coming from a special account?
That's coming out of your trust fund, yes. And we have to prepare the land and find out whether it's adequate to put buildings on it. First of all, the Affordable Housing Committee has no budget. Any money we spend out of our own pocket. So we don't spend much. The other thing is that we did, through a nonprofit organization, bid on some land. We cannot compete with the developers in the town. We don't even come close. We bid on about 6 acres of land, and we didn't even come close to them. We bid almost $500,000. So the only other thing that I can see here is that land is becoming scarcer because we're building up, we're losing land that we might have been able to do something on. So we need to look at other avenues. We'll have to see if the town has some excess land that can be used to build like a senior center. Now, most seniors don't want to leave their homes, but sometimes circumstances make it that they have to leave their homes. So this project, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but this project could be a $5 million project that is funded by HUD. Doesn't cost the town anything except the land. We are dealing with 3 nonprofit organizations now. By law, we have to deal with nonprofits. And when the time comes that if we get the land, there are ways that we may be able to do things down the line. But as of now, we've been very fortunate on this committee. I feel honored and privileged to serve with these people as an old man. Many of these people have dealt with 40Bs over the years. They built affordable housing. They're familiar with it. They're working with HUD, trying to get the proper paperwork done. This is a bid now. When we go to HUD, you correct me if I'm wrong, we're competing against every other committee or community that wants to do the same thing as we're talking about. So I will let Steve talk. He's one of the gentlemen that has worked with 40Bs.
Okay, just 1 minute, please. An announcement first. There are two cars that are blocking the front door. One is a silver Toyota H21937, and the other is an orange BMW 7921PX. They both have to be moved, or they're going to be towed. A silver Toyota H21937 and an orange BMW 7921PX. So both of these cars need to be moved. Before we proceed in discussion, I'm advised it might be easier to discuss 11 and 12 together because the funds for 11 relate to land in 12. So I'm going to open up Article 12 at the same time. So let me do that. Article 12, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to transfer all or a portion of the town-owned property off Heritage Road abutting the Southborough town line described in this warrant article. Said transfer to be by a sale in fee simple or by a lease for a term of up to 99 years and in accordance with all applicable state and town bylaws, including general laws, Chapter 30B, to one or more not-for-profit organizations with such representation of Ashland residents or other qualifications deemed to be necessary and appropriate by the Board of Selectmen. Said land to be used for the purpose of constructing affordable rental housing for elderly, low or moderate income persons, which use shall be maintained for a minimum of 40 years. Said transfer and use shall be subject to such terms and conditions and for such consideration as the Board of Selectmen in consultation with the Ashland Affordable Housing Committee deems to be consistent with the above purpose, the interests of the town, and applicable laws and regulations, pass any vote, or take any action relative thereto. And once again, the Planning Board has recommended approval of Article 12. So we discuss both together, and then we will vote on these separately. And I believe you still have the microphone. I didn't want to take it away.
Thank you. I'm speaking as a homeowner who lives directly across the street from the property that's described in Article 12. And it's currently already existing open space. To my understanding, it includes wetlands and conservation land. I'm concerned that the vote is premature at this time because there are a lot of unanswered questions before a decision can be made summarily about the use of this land for any specific purpose. I am not, with respect to Article 11, objecting to consideration of development of affordable rental housing on town-owned land. I'm speaking to this land in particular in Article 12, which speaks to transferring it for this specific purpose. Examples of questions at a basic level: where exactly is the property? How much of the land is conservation land or wetlands? What's the Conservation Committee's view? How would it be accessed? What's the land zoned for? Importantly, what other uses, including maintaining it as open space, have been considered? What would the impacts be in terms of traffic, noise, loss of wetlands on those who surround this property? I recognize that there are many people here who do not live directly across from or near this property, but I would ask for your support in seeking the deferral of this vote, or, if it's more proper, the opposition to it at this time, until such time as there's been an opportunity for more public process and for those who may be directly and severely affected to obtain more information and to participate more fully publicly in this process. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Please settle down. Yes, sir.
Stephen Greenberg, 22 Stony Brook Drive. I live about a quarter of a mile from the proposed project. I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee. Basically, those were many questions that need to be answered, and that's why we're asking for up to $90,000 of the committee's own money to do the research to find out exactly what can be done on this parcel of land. It's 26 acres. There are substantial wetlands. Of the 26 acres, approximately 10 acres would be used for the development of senior housing. There'd be plenty of room as a buffer between existing homes and the proposed project. And I think it's far better for a town committee to move forward with a project, especially a 40B, and do something in the town's own best interest as compared to an outside developer coming in because we don't have the 10% necessary and jam a project down the town's throat. Thank you.
Ms. Salmon? Salmon?
I guess along with that, we need to ask the question then, why, if we don't, reiterating what the woman before said, why, if we don't know if the land is acceptable yet, are we transferring it to another entity outside of the town? And what happens if we transfer it to the entity outside of the town and it's not acceptable to use for building? Do they now own the land and we're just out the land?
Jessica, tonight.
Ms. Holt?
I'd like to answer that.
I am,
1 second, Isabel. Ms. Holt.
I'm very concerned about I don't know if all of you are familiar with the phrase NIMBY, about the way that our community of Ashland is moving. I'm hearing over and over, not in my backyard. To be a community includes people with children, where we need new schools. A community which we supported last week as a town meeting. A community also includes elderly of all different income levels. And I feel that we need to support the people, the elderly in our community, that have supported other projects throughout. And as a community, I hope that we pass this item with 100%. We need to help the elderly in this community that have spent 50 to 60 years providing the other services. Thank you very much for your support.
Isabel? Isabel?
I'd like to answer a couple of questions. Isabel Harrison, member of the Affordable Housing Committee. First of all, the first woman that spoke, this development will not be anywhere near Colonial. It comes in off Independence. There's 26 acres there. We're looking to use approximately 10 acres. The reason, and I think this may partially answer Cassie's question, that we feel confident of this. We have had some testing done on the land. It was an informal type testing, but the land looks suitable to build on. The only money that HUD will give out at this stage of the game is for senior housing and affordable housing. We're looking for a senior complex there that would fit into the neighborhood, leave open space for a playground or a field at some point. The rest of it is all wetland that's near Colonial and so forth, which would be a buffer to this piece of land. That will be left in its natural state. It can't be used for anything because of it being wetlands. The other point I wanted to make is we have 3 senior housing developments in Ashland right now. One on Park Road, which is approximately 40 units, and we had a study done with a grant we got from the state in 98. In 98, they told us that that development is not handicapped accessible. It should be torn down and redone. The 2 other ones we have is Ashland House on Main Street, 96 units, I believe, there, and Ashland Commons that I think has 46 units for seniors. Both of those are privately owned. One, the lease is up in 2005. The other, it's 2007. The federal government used to give 20-year leases. Now they want to give 2- and 3-year leases. If those go condo or market rate, which the owners can do, we have no senior housing that's subsidized for seniors. and we have a lot of seniors in this town that need it.
Yes. Ken Treehub, 32 Russet Hill Road, member of FinCom. I have a question for the proponents and then a statement to make. In terms, is the application to HUD, is the transfer of the land a requirement to file the application?
What we would be doing, the federal government, which we're dealing with, HUD, will not give any grants to municipalities. Whether it's the politicians or the townspeople, they don't trust, I don't know. But you have to go through a nonprofit. We have talked to two at this point that have experience in this area. In both cases, we would be setting up a separate entity which would be made up of people from this nonprofit that would be picked, along with residents of the town of Ashland, if you read the article, and that's what would make up the new entity. The town can then, at the selectmen's, and what we're asking is to give the selectmen permission to do this tonight, they can determine a lease or whatever they want on that land to this entity so that we can then apply for the grant. We cannot get it unless this land is tied up in an entity, including a nonprofit. It will not come directly to the town.
I guess the question that we have is the $90,000, which, by the way, I think all the members here, FinCom at least, support the idea of affordable housing here. So some of the comments that were made earlier that might have indicated otherwise are simply not true. Simply trying to protect the towns exactly the same way we did with the school project, where the land transfer was contingent on the project going through, and if the school project didn't go through, then the land reverted back to the town. And the concern here is if we spend the money in the engineering work and design work proves that the land is unsuitable for this, because it's not entirely clear at this point, we want to make sure that the land is not, we want to make sure the land does in fact come back to the town. And as written, that does not work the way this article is written.
That would be, we tried to leave this article fairly loose. I think that would be one of the stipulations the selectmen would put into it. At least I hope it would be. But you've got to remember, this entity is going to be made up of people that are residents of Ashland.
Before we go further, I want to welcome the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, looking very fit and tan. Mr. Bryce.
Mr. Moderator, just a clarification. On Article 12, it's the Board of Selectmen's prerogative to transfer subject to state law and local regulations. By vote of Article 12 does not effectively transfer the land. There's another process, a whole other process of disposition of surplus property is what it's called under state law that has to be followed, that the selectmen, according to the criteria that are set up within Article 12, must follow. Now, I certainly can't speak for my honorable Board of Selectmen for which I work, but I wouldn't think that in their infinite wisdom they would authorize, they would vote to transfer land that wasn't buildable. If I spend $90,000 and found that you couldn't build on it, I can't believe that this Board of Selectmen or anyone following this Board of Selectmen would transfer the land.
John Cohen, FinCom. The question is that, yes, the selectmen would take all those precautions, but then HUD would make the final decision whether or not they're going to fund it. And if they make that decision and decide that, no, they don't want to do that, it's under that condition that we would like to see the land come back to the town.
Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Thomas.
I think what we need to do is to concentrate on the wording and not get bogged down with who's doing what. The wording is, and we wrote this pretty carefully, is to authorize the selectmen to begin a process to deal with the Affordable Housing Committee and to deal with HUD. The study would be, the $90,000 would be to study whether it's appropriate. Assuming for argument's sake it would be appropriate, then the next step, in conjunction with HUD and the committee, would be able to find the following: one or more nonprofit organizations, land to be used for specific purpose under certain conditions. If the study proves that this land wasn't suitable, you'd spend up to $90,000. The land still remains under the Board of Selectmen, which in theory is the town. If, in fact, the study proved that it was affordable and doable, one of the conditions of any sale under 30B or any transfer would be subject to full funding by HUD, et cetera, et cetera. As long as I'm town council, that's how I would write it, and I think we've written every other thing we've done it that way. So the problem with this is, without authorization to at least place it into the hands of the Board of Selectmen, HUD, as I understand it, won't begin to talk to you. Is that correct? So you're granting the theory behind what the committee's trying to do, but the town's giving up nothing but $90,000 if you pass this as a package.
Mr. Amico. Tony Amico, 27 Kings Row. I'm just wondering, the $90,000 seems to be doing the study on the land up off of Oak Street by Heritage. Isn't there any other town land that we can go and do an assessment of in terms of, the young lady who was up here 2 minutes ago basically said if the town controls its access to 40B, et cetera, you get a better plan. So, you know, I know that behind this school there's some town-owned land that's pretty wet, not suitable for the construction of a large, spread-out enterprise, but may be suitable for, you know, the other houses. So, personally, the $90,000 I think is great, but I wonder if we spent $100,000 and did two areas, that area or this area or some other town area, and prepared ourselves in that way, if that wouldn't be a more prudent way to go about doing it. Isabel?
We've looked all over town for affordable housing. We wanted something close to downtown. The land behind the school is not suitable for affordable housing for seniors. Most of it is wet, and what's not wet is utilized by the school or will be. So we have no land other than this that's town-owned that is feasible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Lee Red, 65 Independence Lane. I live right across the street from the area that's going to be built upon. Sorry. Lee Redden, 65 Independence Lane. I live right across the street from the proposed land. I bought my house in June, and I think I'm the elder person on the street. And so I think I've talked to most of my neighbors about this. I think the idea of, I mean, most of us probably would not object to elderly housing. I've heard the term elder housing. I've heard a playground. Most of us have kids, so the idea of a playground or some playfield nearby sounds good. What we're concerned about, given our, I mean, most of us didn't even know where the mine in the school was until this weekend. So we feel like the game has been played before we even got a chance to figure out what the rules are. And I have a question, and I have to vote no, just because I have ignorance right now. I mean, is there a specific plan that says this is where the building's going to be, this is where the playground's going to be? You probably have 20 people from my neighborhood here just out of sheer fear that we bought houses with no idea that construction was going to happen next to us. And the other point was that the builder had told us that nothing would happen in this area until a homeowners association was allowed to develop. I don't know if that has any truth or not, but so I have a question to the older lady, and I have to vote no until I know more about it.
I'll speak for the older lady so she doesn't go for his throat.
They're very attractive, older women. She reminds me of my mother.
Yes, sir. The proposed project is what HUD refers to as a 202, which is 62 and older. The Affordable Housing Committee has investigated every potential parcel of land in town, and this acreage, which again is a quarter of a mile from where I live, is the most suitable. And the $90,000 isn't giving the Affordable Housing Committee the green light to do whatever we want. We will not work autonomously. We will be working closely under the direction of the Board of Selectmen, and we need the $90,000 to figure out exactly what we can do with this parcel, create buffers, possibly some recreational land or some fields for kids and that type of thing. But it's something the community desperately needs, this housing for seniors. This is 62 and over. We need the money to investigate and answer many of the questions that have been asked. But unless we get started, we're going to be facing potential developers with 40B programs who will wind up with projects much more severe than anything we could ever present, which would only be to the detriment of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ken Rush, Belknap Circle. My question goes to, is there some idea of what the Affordable Housing Committee has in mind? An earlier speaker mentioned it might cost $5 million. A later speaker mentioned, well, we'll only need about 10 acres. That suggests that there's some sort of preliminary conceptual design in mind, and if so, I'd like to get some details such as they may exist on, number of units, configuration, how many stories, stuff like that, if that information exists.
We have no design at this point. Given the amount of land that we would utilize, which would be 10 acres very likely, out of the 26 acres that are there, we think possibly 50 units. When it comes time to design it and have an architect develop the plans for it, then we would want the neighbors involved. That's the reason we haven't gone to anybody yet in the neighborhood, because at this stage it's too preliminary for all of us. We do not want a 5-story building, I'll tell you that. We want something that'll fit into the area. There will be buffer zones, and we do want to have some land left for recreation. In looking at that particular neighborhood, it doesn't look like there's many backyards there. And this could be an advantage to a lot of the neighbors.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Hi, my name is Pat McHale. I live at 99 Independence Lane. My question basically is just one of information here because I am new to Ashland, 6 months. And again, as Leah pointed out, it seems like the game has been played without us really knowing the rules. And really my question is this. The builder, I guess, Pulte, as most of you may have known, just completed the last house for sale there. And it was just ironic that today happens to be this particular thing comes up in the actual town meeting. Has this been a deal with Pulte as part of the land surrounding the Pulte boundaries? And if so, should a Pulte let us know during the course of purchasing the home itself?
Mr. Ellsworth? I think this may be getting a little bit out of control. We've owned this land for about 10 to 15 years. It was given to us by the developer who did Constitution, the extension of Constitution, Belknap, and a couple of other streets over there. The logical extension of Heritage and Constitution. There is, as far as I know, no association whatsoever between Pulte and the town on this. And any representations that you got from any salesperson at Pulte about what may or may not have been planned for that town certainly wasn't done with any knowledge of anybody on the Affordable Housing Committee or the Planning Board or any of that. So in terms of what is happening here, this is not really the deck stacked against you. This is the beginning of a process. And in order to start the process, we have to have a little bit of money to find out what can happen over there. But there is absolutely no attempt, and it wasn't really implied, but I want to make certain you all understand, there is no attempt here to do something that would be detrimental to the neighborhood. This has been something that's been ongoing in this town for 2 or 3 years, discussions about what to do with that land. Playgrounds, this, that, affordable housing for elderly have been at the top of the list. And if you folks are just finding out about it, well, you just got here, okay? And the whole process requires money to kickstart it so that we can find out whether we can do something logical over there. That's what this is all about. Not a deal swung with pulte.
I'm not implying that's the case. What I'm referring to the fact is that we all bought lots on there, and there was no access road shown on Independence Road whatsoever. Independence Lane, excuse me. So that would indicate that there was some kind of plan already in place prior to us actually purchasing the lot. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. Moderator, I want to ask Steve Curlin a question, but part of this land has been in the town's name for many, many years. It was taken for non-payment of taxes some 50 or 60 years ago. The rest of it, as Mr. Ellsworth said, was given to the town by developer Stanley Pasewicz when he developed Constitution in the first part of Heritage. If I could defer, and the access to there's 2 accesses to this parcel. Other than that, it's fronting on Colonial Drive. Colonial connects Heritage with Thomas Road. One access is off of Heritage over the gas easement, going northerly and then westerly to the property. The other access is as part of the subdivision that was submitted for Independence, an access, I believe it's about 40 feet wide, from Independence southerly to this parcel. It's on the south, abuts the homes that are on the south side of Independence as you're going from Oak Street towards Oregon Road on the left-hand side. But if I could ask, Mr. Moderator, through you to the town planner or somebody on the planning board, does not any development on this parcel, as long as it's not 40B, have to comply with zoning? And so therefore it would meet all the zoning requirements that have to be subdivisions to the planning, submittals to the planning board for considerations. So this is, as Mr. Ellsworth said, just a tip of the iceberg, just start. But this has been on the books, it has been town property, there has been access from both Independence and Heritage since the submission of the subdivisions, which is well before any houses were built up there.
Oh, I agree, and I'm just making the point that we were not really informed of that until we come to the town meeting, because it wasn't when they sold the houses, they didn't indicate that. And that's all fine. I'm not arguing the fact that it's going to be elderly housing or anything. What I just want to know is how this came about, and should I have been known. I'm not saying I would have bought the house or not. I like the area, I like Ashland. However, I just want to know how that's all determined, and that would we have a say later on when the plans are actually generated to say, do we have a voice of saying what can be placed there or what we disagree with? That's all I'm asking.
Well, Mr. Okay.
Mr. Teller?
Judy Teller, Affordable Housing Committee. I just want to let everybody, the neighbors, know how this came about. You probably don't know that we're just finishing up the Sudbury Park development, which was 26 homes on Raymond Marchetti, 10 of which went for affordable housing to families. We then looked at the needs of the town. There are over 150 seniors on a waiting list for senior housing in this town. There are 2 buildings in the town out of 3 that do affordable housing for seniors that could be expired use in 2 years, which means that we'll lose those and our seniors will have nowhere to go. I don't think this is what we want. This isn't the kind of town we should be.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Joe White, 19 Heritage Avenue. I just want to say I am for affordable housing, but I want to do it under the right circumstances. And I want to make sure that I don't think we have enough information here to make a decision either to transfer the 90,000 over or to transfer the land. I keep hearing things that we don't know if we can build something there. It looks like it could be suitable. It looks like it doesn't abut backyards. There's a lot of ifs and too many ifs and buts in this situation here. I think we need to pursue all areas of the town, and it turns out if this is the best parcel of land and if this is the best piece of land and it's suitable, we should revisit it at a later point. I don't think we have enough information. I respectfully disagree that this is the best part of land that's close to town. I mean, I live up there. I know it's not close to town. It's like 4 miles away from the center of town. Why this land was chosen, maybe that's the only land that was available, but I don't think it's the closest parcel of land. I do think we need this money to be transferred for research to find out what does need to be built there. I think we need a better presentation to find out what is going to be there before I feel comfortable voting yes on this. And I would like just to ask quickly what the Finance Committee recommends, and if it does pass yes, what are the next steps in the process?
Yes, ma'am. Maybe not. I don't know. Okay, Ms. Salmon?
We deferred on that because we were waiting for a response from town legal counsel on whether the concerns that we had could be addressed in the way the article was written. With you all, we finally heard our answer tonight. We have not heard the answer before this, so that's why there's no recommendation.
So you also agree there's not enough information to make a decision at this point, so...
No, I can't speak for the FinCom because we haven't discussed this separately and taken a vote. What we did discover tonight is that our concerns were addressed. Our concern was that someone else besides the town was going to end up owning the land, and the project would not be a viable one, or it would not be funded by HUD. Those were the two concerns we discussed at our meeting, and the town council has just informed us that those are taken care of by the wording of the article.
I guess the concern that's prevalent here is there's a lot of people just finding information out tonight, yourselves included, about this process, and I think there's not enough information on the table right now to make the decision. That's my final point.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Shane Drury, 46 Blue Jay Lane. I'm also a member of Ashland Affordable Housing, a relatively new member, just a little over a year ago. Just wanted to let you know that we're glad to see some neighbors here. We've just started with this project, and I just want to make sure that formally we invite some of the neighbors. If you want to join the affordable housing, we would love to have you. We want this to be a win-win. We don't want to jam anything down anybody's throat, and definitely it's up and up. This is just the first time that it's come up into the town meeting, so we're happy to give out information as you need it, and we'd love to have representation from your neighborhood there. We want you to be happy, so we are happy and do the right thing for the community.
Yes, sir.
Peter Murphy, 2 Heritage Avenue. I'm not against affordable housing, but I agree with some of my friends that have spoken before me and neighbors that there's clearly not enough known about this project to make a sensible decision here tonight. I don't oppose the money to study what they can do, but we have a section of town here that's just being developed. We have absolutely no recreation facilities for kids anywhere near us. We have some property up on Oregon Road that one of the owners up there lets us use for soccer, but that's going to be gone. When my kids want to go to a playground, I bring them up to Southborough because that's the closest playground. If they're going to use 10 acres of this, what of the remaining acreage is suitable for fields and stuff, or is it going to be wetlands or lands that we can't touch? Has anybody looked at that? There's not enough information here to make a sensible decision.
Absolutely not enough information.
Okay. Mr. Todd.
Well, I don't think anybody's listening, and I'm sorry that I came in late, but it's obvious that there's a lot of miscommunication going on. This town, in this town meeting, appropriated $3 million to study the Cadre property, to put a school on. We were already going forward with a school project, but we were spending $3 million on the property to find out if we could use it. We're asking for $90,000 to do exactly, sir, what you're saying. Find out what the property is, what can be used for. how much of it can be used for fields, how much of it can be used for housing, and how much of it is wetlands. The whole aspect of this article is that simple. Let's raise and appropriate $90,000, look at the piece of property, and find out if we can use it.
David, if I could...
I'm sorry, we're not raising and appropriate, but standing here at town meeting in Ashland and telling us you're taking your kids to Southborough Field, there's plenty of fields in this town, and the town of Ashland has actively been pursuing fields. We're building 2 more fields over behind the senior center. So if there aren't enough fields in this town, we're trying to add more fields. That's another thing that we're trying to do in this thing. The Affordable Housing Committee has also recommended putting fields in here. We're trying to look at the piece of property. There's nothing being hid from anybody or any neighborhood. All we're trying to do is look at the piece of property.
In this Article 11, I challenge you to show me where it says anything about fields and recreation facilities.
Sir, you're exactly right. When you haven't come to the meetings of the committees, and that's something that is part of the discussions of the Affordable Housing Committee. The article doesn't have to go into that detail, but we'd be glad to talk to you. I welcome anybody in the neighborhood to go to these committees and meetings because they are public and they have them being held.
Just as a follow-up, I welcome somebody from the area to join the Affordable Housing Committee and let your voice be heard and be a representative on the committee. I think that that's one way to help ensure. But I also wanted to just backstep for a minute. When I first became representative several months ago, one of my first constituents that met with me, and I continued to meet regularly with him, is Ben Montenegro. And the reason why he first contacted me, one of the reasons, if you know Ben, was about affordable housing and to see if we could find some money because of the critical need in Ashland. Ashland's affordable housing stock has overall gone down in the last 10 years. There have been some new laws and regulations that have just been passed that if communities do make some gains, they are not as susceptible to large developers coming in and holding the 40B over our heads, which they have done in the past several times. So it does help to a town to have some control over its own destiny. Whether affordable housing can go into this piece of property or not, we do need to have studies. I do applaud the thought of having fields for the kids in the area or some open space. It's not only for the kids, it would be for the seniors as well, to really integrate and have a community space used for the community. I think that that's really important. But the $90,000 is something that we did try to get in the housing bond bill recently this summer, and there was absolutely no earmarking for it. So we are, and the committee is pursuing it through the federal government to try to get some funds because of the real dire need. Even if the current senior affordable housing is continued in this community, there's, as stated previously, there's 150 waiting, and there's many more that would take advantage of it, and we do need to try to keep a diverse community. I think that that's really important. So the first step would be to at least take a look at it. You can't go further. You can't even take a second step until you have the engineers coming in, and then if it is approved, it would have to meet all zoning requirements, and I assume Concom's requirements as well. And when the school was produced in the Cadra property, the Board of Selectmen required the 100-foot buffer, even though that wasn't initially required. That could be something that can be negotiated with this piece of property as well to ensure the continued privacy and yet access for the residents of the area. Thank you.
Ms. Holt?
As a prior planning board member, just for the new neighbors in the community that live up in that area of Heritage Estates, the planning board, through the initial planning of the development, set aside a piece of land in your neighborhood, Stephanie, I think it's right off of Constitution, I can't remember the actual street, and the planning board made it a condition that the developer set aside an area for recreation in your community. The planning board also made it a condition that because of the area and the street being narrow, that there be parking spaces set aside so that you could if you couldn't walk there, drive your kids there. Last year, a group of the neighbors came and actually asked the planning board to take away the parking spaces. But please note that there is an area already in your neighborhood, in case your developer hasn't pointed you to it, it is there, set aside for recreation for children in your neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Mr. Greenberg.
Basically, the Affordable Housing Committee is asking for $90,000 of our own dollars to do the investigation, to answer the questions that everyone has. If the questions can't be answered, there'll be no project. There is no project right now. We need a project.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Bill Peach, 70 Oak Street. I'd just like to point out, in addition to what he just said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Town Council approves of the wording of Article 12 as specifically something to give our selectmen, our Board of Selectmen, the authorization they need to just establish a process so that our Affordable Housing Committee can work with HUD to see if anything can happen. Now, am I correct in that? Is that true that Town Council does approve of this wording?
Thomas?
I wrote it. Okay, so that's something that no one has addressed here, that this was written by our town council not to make it happen, but to start a process to meet the needs of our town. Affordable housing for senior citizens may not be the end-all, but nothing's going to happen without first doing the study, which is Article 11, and really Article 11 doesn't help us unless Article 12 passes, which is why the moderator considered both of them together. So I think we've heard a lot of stuff about this. I don't think there's anybody here who's uninformed at this point in time. This article is to... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Moderator, one other thing you should know, or we could be here till Wednesday and not just till tomorrow. The only methodology for ultimately getting the transfer of this property is by a public procurement process. And it's either going to be sold to the nonprofit or leased for 99 years. There's no gift. In theory, under a lease, the town would retain ownership, and under a sale, it'll be in a public bidding process to the highest qualified nonprofit. And secondly, there is no appropriation. This is $90,000 of trust fund money.
Okay, that answers my question. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Jerry Leon, 38 Constitution. First off, I'm in favor of allocating the $90,000, whatever the term is you want to use for it. I think, speaking for my neighbors, our big issue here is the last time we heard anything about this parcel of land, it was going to be a soccer field. We heard nothing until this made the town meeting warrant. The Affordable Housing Committee didn't inform us. We come to town meeting, and the way this is worded, it doesn't look like just senior housing. And I think that's a concern. Okay, we just spent $42 million last week on a new school, and it kind of looks like here you're building apartments for low and moderate income. That doesn't exclude children. Okay, well, if you're why would you take open space and put more kids in there? Okay. But that's not the way this reads.
It says affordable housing for everyone.
Low and moderate income. That's the way I think most of us are reading it. I could be wrong in that. I think that's the way most of my neighbors read it. Again, it's how it read, and nobody came to us. The other thing is, 2 or 3 years ago, the subject of senior housing came up down behind the current Oak Street apartments. I don't see anybody from seniors here right now. The seniors said they didn't want senior housing there. They said it was too far from the center of town. This is a little further out.
Mr. Motto?
Mr. Thomas?
I believe that if you read this as elderly, either meeting one of two conditions, low or moderate income, it would exclude anybody who's not elderly. There's only two criteria. You got to be low income or moderate, but you got to be elderly.
Again, that's not how we read it.
Mr.
Just a clarification on behind the Oak Street apartments. The Oak Street apartment property
was by a private developer who was trying to put in housing, okay? He was trying to put in apartments, and then he decided if he could also add in some senior housing. That was, the town took that property by eminent domain as part of the town forest.
Right. But again, the seniors came out and said that they weren't interested in having a senior housing there because it was too far from the center of town.
All right, let's move on. Mr. Montenegro?
Just to clarify something, first of all, we looked all over town for land. At one point in time, they were considered putting a school up on that property, I believe, and that fell through. When we took over this land, the first thing we said, we have to do some parks and playgrounds. We cannot build the parks and the playground, but we set aside 4 or 5 acres for a playground. Under the HUD, we could not go out and build a playground. At some point in time, the town would have to come up and make a playground out of that, or some private person. But playgrounds were considered right from get-go.
Yes, sir.
Joe White, 19 Heritage Avenue. I just want to take somebody up on their offer. I will personally join the Affordable Housing Committee to find some information. So I would like to do that. I'll do that. You can take my number down right now, and I just wanted to maybe take one quick statement. I will come right over. I really want to do this. Because I want it in the right place, and I want it in the right area. So I will do that.
You write it down, because I can't write.
I'm going to follow you to your seat.
Yeah.
And then I just want to make 2 quick statements. I just think that I am voting yes on 11 because I think we have to do that to put the money over. I just don't know why 12 is attached to it. And maybe if I was more involved with the process from the beginning, I would know more about it. But I think that I will be, that I think we do have to revisit. And could I call for a vote on the topic at this point?
Wait a minute. First of all, young fella, you can go down to the selectmen and you can sign up for the affordable. We have 2 open positions. Anybody that's interested, go to the selectmen and get on their talent bank. You don't have to give me the number. Okay. You go down there. And I'm sorry that there's so much confusion, but there's a lot of work done by this committee, and they were as forthcoming to everybody as they possibly could. And I'm getting a little ticked. Thank you.
Okay. Yes,
In
sir.
answer to why we would like to see it passed tonight, in order for us to move ahead at all, it takes about 6 months to write this grant. The deadline is May 1st, before the next town meeting, to apply to HUD. You've been told in the last month or so about the big explosion in the schools. What you haven't been told is the big explosion in the elderly. All you baby boomers are coming along now and turning into senior citizens. Barry Breslit's among them. With that, I'd like to call for the vote, but keep in mind, you may need this.
There's something new?
Yes, Steve DeBenedictis, 7 Harris Lane. I just want to make one point of clarification that one of the committee members made earlier. Regarding the developments from Pulte, both on Independence and Heritage, and the allocated parcel of land for recreation, the point I want to make is that land was actually specifically meant for the homeowners associations of those neighborhoods. So what it does not provide is use of that land for the surrounding neighborhoods. I just want to make that point.
Okay, so we're ready to vote on these 2 articles. I think what we'll do is we'll take Article 12 first. We'll vote on the transfer of land for acceptance of Article 12. This will require a 2/3 vote, and we'll do it by a standing vote. So if our tellers could get ready. So all those in favor of acceptance of Article 12, the transfer of land to the selectmen, please rise and remain standing. All those in favor?
Mr. Shapiro.
You can be seated now. 41 on the left. 55 in the center. 43 on the right. 11 in the front. Okay. You can be seated now. All those opposed to acceptance of Article 12. Opposed, please rise and remain standing. Opposed? Mr. Shapiro. 19 on the left. 39 in the center. 11 on the right. 0 in the front. Okay. Okay, you can be seated now. That's 150 in the affirmative, 69 in the negative, being more than two-thirds. That passes. And we'll move on to Article 11 on the Planning Board's motion for acceptance of Article 11. This will just require a majority vote. We'll take this by a voice vote, see what happens. All those in favor of acceptance of Article 11, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. And the ayes have it, and that passes. Move to Article 13. To see if the town will vote to accept as public ways under the provisions of General Laws, Chapter 82 as amended, Fisk Road, Goodnow Avenue, Fay Lane, Buckley Avenue, Hayden Lane as laid out by the Board of Selectmen and shown on certain plans, and to accept easements as shown on said plans for highway purposes, and easements for highway purposes as shown on a particular plan. Take any vote or take any action relative thereto. Mr. Curlin? Mr. Curlin.
Mr. Moderator and town meeting members, this was before town meeting in June. However, because the subdivision wasn't quite complete, we asked to have it pulled at that time. The subdivision is now completed. The motion is to hold the several $1,000s for the water loop, but other than that, the roads and everything else, the plans have all been completed.
So the planning board's motion.
There's a suggestion for the substitute motion to withhold $10,000 for the water looping and to accept the street.
Okay. The motion is for acceptance of the streets with a holdback of $10,000. Discussion. Yeah, Ms. Mignani.
Joseph Miani, 2 Harper Lane. Before we accept the roads, I always like to ask the superintendent of Department of Public Works whether or not the roads are actually going to be maintainable for the next couple of years. Because I know you don't have the funds to keep, repairing these roads and fixing berms, so on and so forth. I just want to make sure that the roads are in pristine condition before we accept them.
Mr. Hoffman?
Curtis Hoffman, 58 Hilldale Road. One of the concerns that abutters had voiced over this project was whether or not the whole system of drainage would in fact work. And I wonder if Mr. Curlin could explain to us what you mean by the water loops and withholding that money, and whether or not you are satisfied that the catchment basins currently in existence are doing what they should be.
Mr. Curlin?
Yes, first the drainage. At town meeting, they had just repaired some of the drainage piping, which the DPW commissioner and I went out and looked at. We saw it through several storms. I actually went out one day in the pouring rain with the town manager. The drainage works. The pavement was feathered so that the pooling wouldn't occur. All these things happened. As for the water looping, what I'm referring to, there's an easement that went over to Bellevue Heights, and that had to be, the paperwork in that had to be completed, and that's what the reason for the holdback.
Further discussion? This will also require a two-thirds vote, but we'll start with a voice vote. Then on the planning board's motion for acceptance of Article 11 with a holdback, cash holdback of $10,000. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. And that passes unanimously. Okay. Moving on. Article 14. To see if the town will vote to amend Section 282-45, Mixed-Use Special District of Chapter 282 of the zoning bylaw of the Ashland Code by deleting said section in its entirety and substituting in lieu thereof a new Section 282-45, which I will not read. However, Deck, do we have some motions here? With the following changes. This is not a correction. Yeah, with the following corrections. If you look at paragraph B, district is to be, this is on page 9 of your warrants that you received. The word Wildwood is to be deleted. So it's zoning map as mixed-use special district. And in paragraph G2, which you will find on page 14 of your warrants, G2, we're going to delete the second sentence from this subparagraph, the sentence that begins development within the Wildwood mixed-use special district may be waived from this requirement is deleted. Okay. Now, 150, there's a period. That's no change. It's the second sentence that's deleted. Okay. Yeah. 150. I'm advised that the correct is 150. the minimum frontage shall be 150 feet, period. That's what the paragraph says. Then in paragraph G6 on the next page, A, the word waived on the last line, unless waived, should be unless allowed. Okay? So it reads, no structure shall exceed a height of 3 stories unless allowed under a special permit. And in paragraph E, 2 EE, there we go, where are we? Help me out. That's on page, I think, 11. Page 11. Change ST in each. Change ST in each column to Y. That's EE, daycare facilities. The SP should be Y. And FF on page 11. The next one, ST, should in each column should be Y. Okay, do we have that? Okay. The last two are on page 11. The E2, EE, and FF. ST in each column should be changed to Y. Okay? So, do we have that? Any questions about those changes? And then the Finance Committee recommends that the town vote to amend the code as proposed, provided that covenants for Area 1 and Area 2 include caps on the number of units and a maximum of 2 bedrooms per unit. Mr. Hunt.
Larry Hunt of the Planning Board. No, Stephen's going to do that in a minute, okay? I'm just going to give as brief an overview as I ever give on the article in question, and then Steve Curlin, the town planner, is going to take over on the technical aspects of it, followed by Adam Schuster of the FinCom, who's going to give us the bottom line dollar impact. First of all, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This bylaw, this basic bylaw, has been in place in the town for quite some years, or for several years, I should say. What we're asking you to do here is simply to change the ratio that's been allowed over the years between multifamily homes and commercial and or industrial. Additionally, this would essentially take all industrial use out of the property in question. So those are the two primary changes. Several months ago, we had a study commissioned with a company called Beals & Thomas, and they're land planners, and they came in with an overview as to what they felt as experts the town should do with the property. And in essence, they supported the concept that we already had in place, and that is to say it's a mixed-use special district. They recommended that we essentially keep it that way. They had specific recommendations, which some of which the planning board thought were reasonable and were incorporated, and then of course planning board and other boards also had input. The neighbors, I might add, had a great deal of input in that they were very much concerned that there may be strictly industrial development on the site rather than a mixed use. One of the things the Beals & Thomas study indicated was that the mixed-use special district versus all commercial and or industrial would actually spread out the traffic patterns. That is to say, we'd have people coming and going with more residential units over the course of a 24-hour period, more so than commercial industrial, which essentially are going to operate in the normal rush hour traffic patterns that we're currently used to. So that was a major concern of the planning board. Coupled with that, Beals and Thomas indicated that, and we concur, that we cannot generate as much taxable income, or shall I say tax revenue, from a commercial industrial development on the site than we could were we to have a higher ratio of multifamily. So the planning board did agree with the Beals and Thomas. One of the problems is we obviously all would like to have a broader tax base. The problem is no one really wants commercial and industrial property or development anywhere near them. We've got to do something to broaden the tax base. And if we look back in history over the last 10 years or so, there's been hardly any commercial industrial expansion within the town of Ashland. There's been a couple of storage, the little storage companies where you have 100 little storage units that you can rent. No one really likes those either, but they pay a pretty good tax bill. But that's been the sum total, you might say, of the commercial industrial. Over the last 10 years, the development has been a combination of single-family homes and condominiums. The single-family homes, as we know, have an enormous draw on the resources of the town in the way of services. Condominiums flat out don't have the demand for town government that the single-family homes do. We've got probably the best database on what happens to condominiums in good times and in bad. That is to say, there's a perception out there that if things go bad, everybody with kids are going to buy a condominium because that's all they can afford. Well, it flat out didn't happen in the 80s, and I see no reason for us to expect that to happen anytime soon. The simple fact of the matter is, this town has two choices. You can sit and wait for commercial industrial development to go into the property. But I warn you, if you read Sunday's Globe, there was an article indicating that right here in Metro West, there's already been a 10% increase in vacancy in commercial industrial in Metro West since last year. The current rate for existing commercial industrial vacancies in Metro West is now 30%. There's no reason for anybody to think that there's any likelihood that somebody is going to come into town and build commercial industrial, especially on Chestnut Street, which is not really a main road. We do know from history, however, that if you put up a condominium, somebody's going to buy it. We flat out cannot afford to wait and leave that land vacant. We have got to broaden the tax base. We have no choice. And to think that commercial industrial is going to rescue us from our tax burdens, it flat out isn't going to happen in my lifetime. So the planning board is going to ask that you support the article in question. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel. This is a modification of a bylaw that's been in place for some time. When we do modify these things, we have to take the entire bylaw and go through it word by word by word, which is rather complex, as you can tell. But essentially, the planning board, Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, the Industrial Development Committee, the Affordable Housing Committee, and the Comprehensive Plan Committee. Every one of those committees in the town of Ashland are in favor of making this change. And it's a rare day when you can find that many committees in this town that agree on anything, okay? So we do ask your support, and we ask your patience for Stephen to get up and give us a little more technical stuff, and we'll try to answer all the questions we can. But again, we do ask for your support.
Regarding the technical, very, very quick technical things, the hearing was held on August 22nd. It was advertised on the 8th and the 22nd of August in the tab. It was posted on the 2nd. The notices went out on the 5th. We made an extra effort to notifying a lot of the abutters in this area. And we had a hearing in October, and also we discussed it again in the planning board on October 16th. What I'm just going to show you very briefly Just move the arrow. What's that? This is an ortho photo, was recently given to me by one of the conservation members who got it from the state. And what you can see, this is about a year or 2 years ago, and you can see the sand pit, you can see the former Cadra property, and you can see the Clocktown site. So you get an idea of how it's situated in the community. And a quick history of that is that why this Sonic article, I think Larry, the member of the planning board, is going to give you a hint of why. I like to go into what are the benefits. He mentioned the tax bases. He mentioned the issue of tax bases, and one of the things about the benefits is that with this zoning, at the same time in this zoning, the Fairfield Corporation placed two what we call restrictive covenants or voluntary covenants that were recorded in the last few days, or actually last week and then again as an amendment today. And what this covenant does, it gives security to the zoning in terms of issues of mitigation measures such as public safety issues, which almost run close to $1 million, or depending on the scenarios. A second thing is it gives us assurances on the improvements to the intersections of Union, Waverly, and East Union Street, sewer installations on East Union, Union, and Chestnut Street, and sidewalk installations on East Union, Union, and Chestnut Street. So there are some benefits by the zoning change because of a covenant that is tied to the zoning. This covenant has already been recorded, so if the zoning did not go through, the covenant in effect would be null and void. So the benefits are there in terms of the covenant documentation that has been recorded, and this gives the town a little bit more flexibility than if you had an outright submission of a normal subdivision, for example, which you do not have these negotiations. So I like to move on. Right there, yep. Go to this one, go to this. Yeah, that's good. I went through the benefits, as I said, $948,000 to $1,071,000. And that's based on the contributions per unit, both on the residences and on the commercial sites, because we, through some further tightening since the last town meeting, we were able to go from $500,000 to almost $1 million roughly. Just briefly, this was always it was an industrial site for the reason being it was a sand pit, and basically the sand pit has a life, and it'll eventually be expiring. And part of the agreement with the covenant actually was for a plan and a deadline for the pit and its operation to cease. So that's an addition that was one of the items that was negotiated and discussed. In 1992, the town passed the original mixed use, and I give a very quick briefing of what the land uses are, and then here we are asking to fine-tune it to increase the ability to have some residential uses on it, and to tighten up on a number of the zoning regulations dealing with dimensions, buffers, and ratios. Again, this is a close-up of the site. You can see the equipment, and this is part of the agreement to close it down eventually. And the mapping here shows the blue hashed lines of the industrial areas that are currently zoned, and the basic blue area within the dotted blue is the industrial site. The former Cadra site is above it, and that's as a residentially zoned area originally, and that gives you an idea of what the zones are in the mixed-use zone right now. And this is the plan, and because of this plan being a little bit allows for development areas and buffer zones, and it was a little bit vague, and the purpose of this is to really tighten up the bylaw, so we have restrictive dimensional requirements and spell out some of the setbacks and other things which were strong in the 92 bylaw. I think this is self-explanatory. These are the reasons we feel that as Mr. Hunt has already mentioned about the need for the, what we could do there. Go ahead. And again, we looked at the other types of uses and found out that basically the best return at this point in time is for units that are housing in terms of 1 and 2 bedrooms. And again, this is what was out. We just could not see. We don't have, the site does not have excellent locational advantages in this community yet. And there are better sites, and as just been alluded to, there's a high vacancy rate. And for at least 10 years plus, there will be that rate until all the major 495 belts are filled up. This is the map that you see. This is the boundaries of the proposal. The red is the sand pit, the blue is the former Cager site where the school site is, and the yellow is the clock town site. So in the bylaw, you can associate the different areas with the colors, and then there's the blue buffer around it. These are some of the zone changes, and we can get into that a little later, except just to tell you that one of the concerns is that in the existing zoning, we had areas depicted, and we're now tightening it up with this specific tables of what uses are allowed. And the same with the residential. The residential was open because of the fact that we got rid of the 15% rule. We now have an open door rule right now, and we felt that having specifics that are on the chart to the right would be tightening the bylaws so everybody could see particular uses and how to do it. Again, here's the dimensional requirements. The dimensional requirements spell out the densities on the housing in particular, and what you see in bold is what was one of the comments made earlier about some of the changes. And again, here we have the setbacks, and we talk about trying to preserve the buffers again. Go ahead. And this deals with the height. I know there were some concerns at the previous town meeting, and the maximum in any place would be 5 stories, and this would only be in certain situations. All the others are restricted now in the size of the buildings in terms of whether we're all residential or all commercial. Again, I mentioned the buffers. We have the buffering zone. We kind of added to that and referred it to a plan of land that was recorded. This is a blow-up of the neighborhood near the edge of the, you'll see Yankee Lane here, and this is Fatima Drive. And you get an idea what the neighborhood is and what we're trying to preserve in terms of a buffer. So the area that isn't exposed with the gravel pit would be the area of the buffer that we're talking about. Now, finally, I have 2 items, and the last one I'll refer to the FinCom about. The first one is the traffic impact analysis. We looked at it, and as Mr. Hunt alluded to, you can see from the different uses the numbers of traffic. And what I would be looking at here is the traffic generating numbers. And actually the biggest number, if you look on the mixed use, is the retail. The retail would cost the most in terms of traffic. The original proposal, which was under current zoning, and assuming that was to be built, would give you the other numbers down on the office and light industry. And you can see that some of the ratios are very close in terms of what the uses are, and you can see that some of the residential uses are actually a lower percentage than some of the office and industrial in terms of traffic generators. So it gives you an idea of when the generation is occurring in terms of totals, and it gives you when the peaks are occurring. So you have an idea of the numbers. And with that, I'm going to refer now on the financial to Adam Schuster.
I was expecting to do this about an hour and a half ago, so I'll try not to put you all to sleep. I know. The FinCom's objectives in the analysis we did were first to reasonably estimate the financial impacts on the town of the proposed zoning change, and two, to determine if the town would be better off financially with the current zoning or the proposed zoning. This is just a financial analysis. The approach we took was we reviewed the proponent's analysis, but we ultimately decided to prepare our own analysis. We used independently obtained values where it was appropriate to ensure objectivity and conservatism in our numbers. And we attempted to minimize the town's financial risk by evaluating alternative scenarios. First, we're going to look at the revenues and then the expense side. So you can see this is not all the detail. If someone does ask, which I hope you don't, I do have it available. For revenues, we looked at residential real estate taxes. We based that on the estimated valuations of what would be built and estimated tax rates in the future. For retail, we also include retail real estate taxes based also on the estimated square footage of what could be built and the tax rate. Commercial real estate taxes, again, we based it on the estimated square footage and the estimated revenue per square foot. We also included excise taxes for vehicles that would be owned by folks who lived in the residential units. On the expense side, the big one is educational expenses. We based that on the budgeted fiscal year 03, this year, cost per child of $8,746, and historical average children per condo of 1.14 children per condo. As I think Larry mentioned, that's per 10 condo. That's based upon years and years of historical data. For municipal services, which is essentially everything the town provides other than education and the enterprise funds, we base that on a per capita allocation of non-educational expenses and the estimated number of residents per condo unit. And for commercial expenses, we based on the commercial expenses as a percentage of the commercial tax levy in the FY03 budget. So these are all based upon actual numbers in this year's budget. What do we find? On proposed zoning, this is when fully built. This is not in the first year. And this is all annual. These are all annual figures. The revenues from the proposed zoning is about $2.5 million. Expenses, a little over $1 million. The net benefit of the town, about $1.4 million. Existing zoning, and this is assuming fully built commercial space. Revenues, $514,000. Expenses, $238,000. Net benefit to the town, $276,000. The proposed zoning is an additional $1.1 million annually over what the current zoning would allow. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't looking at a really rosy scenario. We don't think it was, but we always like to be sure. So we just said, what if valuations on residential real estate drop by 20% and educational expenses per child increase by 20% and the number of children increases by 20%? I don't think they could all happen, but if they did, what would happen? Net benefit to the town would drop to $729,000 from the proposed zoning, which is still $453,000 higher than with the existing zoning. A couple of notes. We included the expenditures for operating expenses, police, fire, etc. What we did not include would be things such as additional police cruisers, fire engines. There was no real way to quantify that and include that. That is not included. However, we also did not include the $1,000 per unit contribution the developer would need to make to the town for each unit built. And $1,000 per 1,000 square foot developed. Approximately $1.2 million. I'm a ventriloquist now. The other thing I did want to bring up, for those of you who may have been at last week's longer presentation, we made the comment that additional growth has the impact of affecting debt exclusion projects. This is for this project or any other project. When we vote on a debt exclusion, it's generally for a dollar amount for debt or something of that sort, which doesn't change based upon what is built in town. If this or any other project comes in, the effect of that is to reduce what everybody's piece of the pie is. I'll just leave it at that. If there are any questions when it is opened up, I'll be glad to answer them.
Mr. Moderator?
Okay, just one more clarification to page 11, subparagraphs E, and F that we went over before. They should be Y in every column. All three columns, Y in every column. E, and F. That's 2, E, and FF. Yeah, so what Steve was saying is that will conform the bylaw to state law requirements. Okay? Okay.
Mr.
Yes, sir.
Moderator? Martin Acevedo, 77 Warren Road. I just have a question that perhaps I wanted to know if this was considered and included in the plans. We continue to develop property land in this town, and we continue, by doing that, we continue to reduce the amount of surface area that rainwater can go into our wells. I know that this summer we had a water ban, so in this presentation I would like to know what's the impact on our water resources, how much is it going to be increased, and also what's the impact on our sewer system, and what's the amount of money that we have to incur by additional payments.
Mr. Carlin.
To answer your question, the site itself, since it's been mined out, so it doesn't perk, so you don't see recharge on the site already. So this would be building it back up, so there would be more recharge than we currently have, because the site is now excavated and it's at a bedrock condition, or it's exposed. So you would be building the buildings and grassing and landscaping around it. So you would actually increase it from what it is as of right now. In terms of the sewer, the developer has to get on his own. He has to get the gallonage to tie in for the units. Part of the covenant agreements is that he's going to be extending sewer lines. So that's included as well in this proposal.
Is the amount of money that we pay to the the Water Resources Authority, is that going to be increased? Okay, my specific question perhaps is how much more gallons, thousands of gallons of water do we have to, in view of the fact that we're having a water ban, how much thousands of gallons, the consumption that we have to see? It's a simple question, simply one information.
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Bliss.
On the sewer gallons or the sewer use, the charges are borne by the users. So anybody, including whatever happens to be developed at this site, would pay the regular sewer use charges, so there wouldn't be any increase proportionally to anybody else for the sewer use. As far as the water ban is concerned, the water ban this summer was not because we were short of water. It's because of a regulation that DEP put upon us that is determined, or our water usage is determined by the water level in the Hopkinen Reservoir, which is really not an accurate reflection of how much water we have available. But that's what DEP said, that basically the state DEM, Department of Environmental Management, which runs the state park, is allowed to run water from the upper reservoir through the smaller swim area to keep it clean. That draws water in periods of low rain and low water fall into the reservoir, which restricts our use of the reservoir. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what DEP put on us.
So
it has nothing to do with any development. We're able to provide, to deliver on an incremental basis over the next many years up to 6 million gallons a day from our water resources at the reservoir. But we're restricted by the water level, which again has nothing to do with available water for the town.
So
Now, I'm sure that's kind of foggy, but that's the best I can say. It's a confusing issue at best.
Okay, so we have an infinite resource of water.
No, it's restricted to 6 million gallons a day, but it's incremental. Right today, we can't pump any more than 1,600,000 and how many gallons? It's about 1.68 million gallons a day is what our permit today is. But as development occurs on a regular basis, we can ask for small increments to that amount to keep up with our use, up to our permitted pumpage of 6 million gallons a day in the future.
Mr. Hoffman?
I have two questions for the FinCom. First of all, in your motion, you are recommending that there be caps on the number of units. Can you give us a sense of what the size of the caps is going to be that you're going to ask for? How many units total?
Mr. Schuster?
I'll defer to the planning board. We wanted caps, period, and they have incorporated those caps within what you see tonight, I believe, but I'll let them speak to that.
Mr. Carlin?
There's a 100-unit cap per year based on the covenants
For 5 years.
for
Yes.
5 years. If he builds out, he could build out longer, but the maximum is 100.
Okay. Secondly, you've made it clear that the benefit to the town financially will not be immediate, but will phase in so that the figures you gave us represent build-out of that area. Can you, because of the fact that we have voted at the last 2 meetings to substantially increase the tax burden upon ourselves, and I'm not opposed to what we did there, but for the first several years, especially with the school, we're taking a big hit. Can you give us a sense of how the money phases in with this project over the years of its development? So you can give us a sense of how that distributes across those first 5 years.
They're actually, I think may have the mixture. I'm misunderstanding your question. The revenues from this bear no correlation to the debt issue we talked about last week or any other debt issue.
No, but of course, the benefits to the town in terms of increased tax revenues phase in as development.
Right. I would expect them to be proportional with the development. So I would expect if it's 20% developed in year 1, you would see 20% of the benefit.
And the costs would also be similarly incremental?
I don't see a reason why they wouldn't be. I don't want to say yes or no, but there are no big costs here. These are just costs of additional children, which are per 10 units. So they're proportional. All the other expenses would be proportional, I would think.
So you would expect that the ratio of cost to benefit would remain constant over the development of the project?
They should be relatively proportional, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Vitale?
Yes, Mark Stoney, 49 Hawthorne Road. I'm just looking over the age restriction, multifamily, and the public housing for the elderly. What is definition 28249C? What in words is that?
Are you referring to age restricted?
Age restricted multifamily, yes.
Age restricted refers to housing for people over 55. They have to be 55 or older.
Okay, and the public housing for the elderly, can that be titled in that restriction of affordable housing for the elderly?
I would say no.
Okay, and who's building in this, in the area A that we're talking about for the mixed use?
The property owners. There are property owners on A, B, and C.
Okay, I'm talking A, the Wildwood area.
It's owned by the Stafford Corporation.
And how many units are going in there?
A total of 528, maximum.
And on the use of the structure, custom area accessible to the permanent use and sewer treatment. Who's going to be doing the sewage treatment facility?
That they were going to pursue sewer, and they would have to get gallonage and purchase it.
Okay, is that the same traffic that's doing the 126 helping out on the project there?
This side of town would be on Chestnut Street. We're in the Chestnut Street district as opposed to the Pond Street district.
Okay, so that's just basically two different things, okay? And the municipal cemetery, is that going to be the expansion part of the building in the area of the area A to the buffer?
The cemetery is on the former Cager property, and that's been agreed upon in the previous town meeting in terms of the plans from the school.
Okay.
And that's roughly 10 acres.
Okay, and then the buffer throughout the, from the area B, from the school to the Stafford area, that's all passed already by former town meetings.
The existing mixed use is there, but there's a lot of grandfathering currently with some of the property owners.
Okay, I'm basically myself in favor of passing this, because we do need the housing for the residents and the affordable, and we do need sewer to get the water really working on both sides of town. And I'm just saying, let's just go forward and just vote on it and just say we need it. Go ahead.
Mrs. Gunfardi?
Joan Friday, One Shore Road. I have basically the same questions I think they had last year, and that's in section G6A and B on page 15. The building height, I'm very concerned about putting 5-story buildings in that area or any area of town actually. I'd like to hear from the fire chief if he's here, and I would also like to submit a substitute motion to amend those to 3 stories max.
Mr. Moderator, I'd like to respond. There's been some discussion on that since the last town meeting. I want to start off by saying in no case will building exceed 5 stories. And in that case, the only case where would it be 5 stories would be in the mixed-use buildings, where we would have the first 2 floors possibly as office and retail, and then the upper floors residential, In all cases of purely commercial buildings and purely residential buildings that stack to the 3 stories or less. So this was worked on, and it's also spelled out in the covenant as well. There are height restrictions in the covenant. In no cases will go to that 5 stories or more.
I still have serious reservations about it. I'd still like to submit a substitute motion to 3 stories.
Can you just hand me something? Is there a second? I hear a second. Okay. Okay, the substitute motion is with respect to 6A and B, or 6. It's 6 and 6B.
Oh, yes, I need to add in 6, thank you.
6 and 6B.
Sorry.
Okay.
It would be 6,
Okay.
6A and 6B.
Okay. All right, we'll treat it in due course. Do you want to speak any further on it? Okay. Yes, sir.
My name is John Adelberg. I live at 399 Captain Eames Circle in Ashland, obviously. I'd just like to commend the planning board and the town planner and the other town officials and the consultants for putting this proposal forward. It seems to me that this is an extremely innovative land use concept, and I think it's going to be a model for the way growth can be managed in the town of Ashland and also in other towns of the Commonwealth. It demonstrates certainly an intelligent use of land with regard to the mixture of uses, which I think everybody likes to see, and certainly in terms of the clustering of the buildings, which will protect the open space in the area and the wetland areas that are contained in the property. From an environmental standpoint, we'll certainly be rid of a blighting use and a scar on the landscape, which is the sand pit. If this development will eliminate only one standard single-family subdivision from being developed on a farm or a forest on the outskirts of town, it certainly will be worth it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hunt. I think the fire chief is in the building. If he is, I do have a question I'd like him to address. He left. Okay.
Mr. Moderator. Mr. Blake. Within the next couple of weeks, we will be in possession of our 125-foot aerial tower, which will take care of a 50-foot building adequately.
That was one of my questions. Another question I had was relative to the construction of multi-story buildings. Typically, I'm certainly no expert, but Mr. Hill can probably advise us as to whether or not any sprinkler systems may be required in 5-story buildings of that type. Okay, the building inspector advises us that 5-story buildings would have to be brick, metal construction and would require not only sprinklers but advanced fire detection systems. One of the difficulties in accepting the substitute motion is it mixes up all the numbers. That is to say, the number of units that are allowable will change, the income to the town will change, the deposits that the developer has to make for public safety improvements and things of that nature. All of those things change. And I can't tell you how big the effect will be, but I can tell you that it will be a substantial financial impact. It, by changing that, may remove our ability to force the developer to put in some commercial industrial. Okay? If we do away with that, then theoretically there could be no commercial industrial. We don't want it all residential. We don't want it all commercial industrial. We want a mix, and we think the mix is pretty good. And from a public safety standpoint, we can look at any number of places in Framingham, for example, that are considerably higher than 5 stories. They're not a particularly dangerous situation in today's modern building.
I'd just like to, may I be recognized just to answer about
Just 1 second. It's now 10:40. I would like to finish this debate in 15 minutes so that at 5 of 11 we can vote. So let's all kind of try to keep that in mind. Okay, Mrs. Confrati.
Just very quickly, thank you. I want to make it clear that my only objection is not just safety, although that's certainly primary. If we are going to have a fire truck, that does help. But aesthetically, the town of Ashland, I think a 5-story building is just totally out of place. I believe the telecom building's about 3, am I right? You add 2 more stories to that, and you're looking at a building that's fairly huge and imposing. And I find that very very negative for this proposal, although I think the proposal is very good otherwise.
Just a quick quick statement here. The town actually approved 5-story commercial development zoning about, what was that, 2 or 3 years ago? in which certain corridors along Route 135 in particular did allow for five-story construction, but there's been no herd of developers rushing in to do five-story buildings.
I was
Yes,
opposed
ma'am.
to that also. Beth Rosenblum, Corderville Road. I just have a question. Mr. Curlin mentioned earlier that one of the benefits of the zoning change would be an improvement to the Y intersection at East Union, Waverly, and Union. Could you be a bit more specific, and also how would that be funded?
The developer would enter into an agreement with the town to help fund the study for whether it involves traffic lights or some form of geometric improvement to that intersection. That's part of the agreement in the covenant. There may be a portion that the town would fund. I would not think it's totally self-funding because you have the school going on the other side, possibly.
Mr. Hanna?
I think Mr. Hoffman is the next person. Oh, I don't mind taking it up now. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mr. Hanna.
Okay. This is to the Finance Committee. These are the guys I sort of like anyway. These are pretty good people. I noticed in your analysis of units and cost and interest and expense that this looks like a pretty darn good project. And the growth that you've identified is rather impressive. And I also saw in the middle of this map there was a space called location for Ashland High School, and it's got 42 acres in it. And I'm only interested if you can sort of tell me without accuracy to the fifth place, if that 42 acres were converted and turned into income as the other surrounding acreage are going to also generate because of their prime location, what added revenue would come to the community with that?
I can't answer that question.
You can't, okay. Well, then let me help you.
Now, Mr. Hanna.
We were expecting you would.
That is a...
Well, you
get off of the topic.
gotta understand that, Tom. There's going to be a vote on this issue on the 4th of
Yes,
November.
there is, and it's going to be on this district.
Yes, and if it does not pass for some unforeseen reason, we've got a piece of property that's no longer eligible for a school on it.
That's not true, Jim.
Okay, well, someone, I guess, has to assess in their own mind that there is a value to this piece of property. And if you're going to add up the total cost of what we're going to do, you've got to subtract what income could have been derived had that property been used for some other utilization.
Jim, this is an analysis of the zoning change on this particular piece of the property.
Yes.
The school will be allowed under existing zoning and future zoning. There's no change in the zoning to allow for the school.
No, but the school could be located somewhere else, of course.
Do you have property big enough for it?
Mr. Hanna,
I don't know.
Mr. Hanna,
Okay.
I do not wish to discuss the school property
No, I'm not.
under
I'm
this
trying-
article.
I'm-
Please.
Okay, fine, I'm sorry. Yes, okay.
Mr. Hoffman.
I would also like to draw your attention to parcel B, as we were hearing before. I notice that this includes not only the property that we've traditionally referred to as the Clocktown property, but also 4 private residences along East Union, and the area on the opposite side of East Union, which I'm not certain if the town owns or if it still belongs to the caterers, but I know that there is a private caterer cemetery somewhere in that area, and I'm asking if that is within the area that's shaded or if it's beyond on East Union, and whether or not we are in fact going to be able to deal with those private parcels as well as the large Clocktown parcel in this mixed-use zone.
The 4 lots that you're referring to near Clocktown basically are all private properties. Right. Okay? But those properties are going to be given the options of going commercial at a future date, and the buffering around those would change, reflecting the uses of those 4 lots. As for the north side of East Union Street, that piece of land is owned by the caterers. The cemetery is actually far east on that piece of land beyond the zoning change.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Charlotte Peterson.
And the 4
7
parcels are
Great
part of the
Bridge Road.
zoning change. And they've been in there already.
Yes, ma'am.
Charlotte Peterson, 7 Gray Birch Road. First of all, I'm a close neighbor to this area, and I do basically support the idea, although in past I have not been known to support Mr. Fafford's ideas, but this one I do happen to like. I do have a question regarding the traffic that is going to be impacting, because in speaking with Mr. Hunt last week, he tells me the entrance and exit areas are going to be on Chestnut Street. And one of my main concerns is that terrible curve right by the Fafford Company property right now. And is that curve going to be addressed?
The reality of any proposal that comes, even if the zoning change passes, there will be a site plan review, a major site plan review with the planning board, and the issue of traffic obviously will be revisited, in particular in terms of site distances, and also, even if this passes today, there is no guarantee that the permits, in terms of the site plan, will be approved.
Okay, you spoke about sidewalks on Chestnut Street. Will the sidewalks be on both sides of Chestnut Street or on just one side? And if indeed one side, which side?
We didn't specify, we just specified that they had to put them in. Now, again, we go back to, at the time of the site plan, when he submits a formal proposal, if this passes, that discussion, Chestnut Street is considered like a collector street and requires in our subdivision rules 2 sidewalks, so this is something we would talk about.
Okay, when you were talking about traffic, when was the last traffic study done on Chestnut Street? And what sort of results did you find?
There's been a number of traffic studies done, particularly one probably earlier this year. We are currently asking all the developers, before they submit their site plans, that includes the Gainer site, includes the school to some extent, includes this as well, and includes Mr. Hickey over at Franklin Road to do a whole study of all the traffic conditions along the 135 corridor. So when we get those results, and some of them are doing accounting as we speak.
Okay, another quick question. If this does pass tonight, how soon will we start seeing something being done in that pit? Is it going to be several years down the line, or is it going to be within the next 1 year, 6 months? What's the time period?
I would guess it would be within 1 year, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Robert Agostinelli, 43 Fatima Drive. I'm a direct abutter, and I'm not going to be one of those people that say, don't build in my backyard. It's important to get involved in your community, participate in the efforts. I think the planning board has done a great job over time, and the financial committee thanks for the review, and I urge everyone here to get involved and vote yes for this project.
Mr. Mignani?
I have Joe Mignani, 2 Harper Lane. I want to go back to the intersection again. I thought it was my understanding that the intersection was going to be part of the school study, and that was going to be part of the reimbursement program. But now I'm hearing something totally different, that we're going to have to incur the cost of the intersection change, if there's going to be a change. So I'd like to have clarification on that.
Mr. Teller?
Joe, part of the funding for the school is actually looking at the intersection. We're trying to find out right now from the SBAB if some of the funds can be used for that intersection where it isn't directly in front of the school, so that is part of the school building project, is to look at the intersection. There are more than one person looking at the intersection. The town in general is looking at the intersection also. Mr. Curlin from the planning board are also looking at the intersection and trying to find ways to address it. Whether anything's built there today, tomorrow, or the next 20 years, it's an intersection that is a bad intersection in the community, and it's something that the town does have to address at some point.
Okay. And my second question to Mr. Curlin. A few moments ago, you said something about the fact if the builder decides to do or change his mind about some of the things that he wanted to build there. It was my understanding in reading everything that you people were just about telling him what he had to put in. Am I confused in what you just said a few moments ago? I mean, who's holding who at bay?
The covenant and the zoning actually both trigger percentages of retail and residential uses, or commercial and residential. So he cannot just build totally residential units. If he wants to build all his residential units, he has to build at a threshold. He has to turn and build some of the commercial. If he fails to do that, he's no longer living up to the covenant. There's also provisions in the long term. He could come back, but it would involve 2/3 votes of various boards. So there's all super majorities involved in terms of him making any changes after this.
will there be any penalties incurred by the developer if he doesn't meet certain ratios by a certain time frame?
Well, there is a development schedule, but there's no formal penalty provision, no.
We want to add that.
Yeah, I would argue that the planning board would probably issue some form of hearing, and we probably move to rescind some of the approvals if you fail to comply.
Yes, sir.
Steve Doucette, 31 Fatima Drive. You might say I'm a glutton for punishment, but I spent the last 5 years in planning board meetings reviewing this project. So you might say I'm intimately familiar with it. And the first couple of years it was very confusing as to really where this project was going, whether it was going to be commercial or whether it was going to be residential or whatever. But over the last few years, this project and the planning board has really done a good job to define what's going into this project. You can see the financial revenue that it can bring in. It's a nice mix of community. It adds the multifamily, it adds commercial, it adds affordable housing, which we were talking about first. It helps fund all the projects in town that we just voted in that we've talked about. I went so far and believe so strongly in this as to actually consult with and hire an independent planner to come in here and talk about the benefits of this project, but it seems like everybody's pretty well in favor of this project, and I hope that everybody votes yes.
One more, Mr. Amico.
Just one quick question. How many of the buildings can be the 5-story type? Because 5 stories is pretty big. I mean, what percentage of the total project can be put into 5 stories? 100% of it?
It's even less than 20 because the 328 of the condos have a cap of 3 stories. Those are the typical condos that you see in some of the existing Workman Circle and some of the other places in towns. The only possible place where you could go to 5 stories is in the 2 or 3 mixed-use buildings on Chestnut Street. Other than that, all the other buildings are going to have a cap of less than 3 stories or less.
Okay, they're not built into the side of a slope, so it's 5 on one side.
I have to defer that to the buildings inspector when we got a site plan and how that's interpreted. So that would be interpreted at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we ready for the question? We're going to vote on 2 matters here. We'll first vote on the substitute motion, Mrs. Gonfrati's substitute motion. That will be to restrict or change 6 and 6B from 5 stories to 3 stories in those 2 places. That will be a majority vote. Then we will vote on the bylaw as a whole. That will require a 2/3 vote. Okay, so first as to the substitute motion, Mrs. Gonfrati, which would amend 6 and 6B from 5 stories to 3 stories. All those in favor of the substitute motion, please say aye. All those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Okay. Now, on acceptance of Article 14 with the provisos recommended by the Finance Committee. This will require a 2/3 vote, but it will start with a voice vote. All those in favor of acceptance of Article 14, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no? No. Okay. We'll take a standing vote. All those in favor, please rise and remain standing. Now, after we finish with this article, we will adjourn until tomorrow evening, 7:30 right here, and we'll finish the warrant tomorrow evening.
Mr. Shapiro. 38 in the left. 50 in the center. 45 on the right. 11 in the front. Okay, you can all be seated, please. You can all be seated. And would all those opposed to acceptance of Article 14, opposed now, rise and remain standing. Otherwise, please be seated. All those opposed.
You got it.
Mr. Shapiro. 1 on the left. 5 in the center. 3 on the right. 0 on the front. Okay, that's 144 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative, and that being more than two-thirds, that passes. Yes, sir?
No, motion to reconsider?
Second,
There's a motion to reconsider.
and urge a vote of no.
We'll have the vote. All those in favor of reconsideration, please say aye. All those opposed, no. And those have it. Can I have a motion to adjourn till tomorrow evening? Thank you very much. We'll see you at 7:30 tomorrow. Thank you very much.